Chapter 457. Inside the Hydra military fortress, outside the commander's room. Red Skull Schmidt, dressed in a German official costume, was standing beside the handrail on the third floor of the fortress building, looking down at the luxurious machinery factory below, as well as the fully armed Hydra guards. The corners of his mouth couldn't help but curve into a confident smile. With the Tesseract in hand, the Hydra guards will soon be fully armed with unlimited energy equipment. In this world's World War II battlefield, no army or force can stop his attack. He believes that the world will soon be completely under his feet. Schmidt smiled faintly and was about to turn around and return to the commander's room. However, right at this moment, a thunderous boom suddenly sounded from outside the fortress, and even the fortress began to tremble slightly. The sudden change stunned Red Skull Schmidt. He saw the Hydra guards below begin to rush out of the door, and there seemed to be a commotion outside the fortress. Sirens sounded crazily in every corner. What happened? Schmidt's face was dignified and calm, and he cast a gloomy and terrifying gaze at an officer standing behind him. The officer who was currently in charge of the military fortress had a frightened expression. His forehead was dripping with cold sweat, and the sweat soaked his military uniform. He shook his head vigorously and said, "I don't know, sir." "Then why don't you go out and see?" Schmidt's eyes were cold, and he even had the intention to kill. "Yes, I'll go now." The officer in charge saluted, held his military cap, and hurriedly ran out. Red Skull Schmidt frowned deeply, turned back to the commander's room, and closed the iron door. He thought for a moment, and opened the dark layer hidden in the inner wall. A tesseract was placed inside, glowing with a mysterious blue luster. Fortunately, as long as the tesseract was in his hand, it didn't matter much no matter what happened. Schmidt stretched out his gloved left hand, took out the tesseract from the dark layer, and put it in a suitcase just in case. He sat on the chair in the commander's room, turned on multiple communication channels, and pulled out the pistol at his waist to load it, quietly waiting for the soldiers to send news from outside. On the first floor of the military fortress building. Most of the Hydra members heard the commotion outside and rushed out. Only one Hydra guard went in the opposite direction and sneaked into the military fortress in the dark. "Captain, you're really good at disguising yourself. I've learned a lot." On the shoulder of the Hydra guard, there was a tiny ant-like person, who whispered in admiration. "After all, I became famous because of this." The man disguised as a Hydra guard, Captain America Steve, whispered. Taking advantage of the commotion outside, Steve took the shrunken Scott and successfully knocked out a Hydra guard, changed clothes, and sneaked into the fortress building. Scott asked curiously, "Does the red skeleton you guys mentioned really look like a skeleton?" Because he was injected with a semi-finished super soldier potion, a layer of his skin was peeled off and disfigured. However, he should be wearing human skin now, so it's not that easy to recognize him. Steve, SSSSSSSS voice. "Wow, that's really a bit scary." Scott was still chatting as if he was traveling, without any awareness of sneaking and disguising. As an ant-man, there was no need for this at all. After all, he became the size of an ant, unless he was focused, no one could see him even if he stood in front of him. "Tawny is right, you talk a little too much." Steve sighed helplessly. He didn't see Red Skull on the first floor and wanted to walk to the second floor. But at this moment, he ran into a team of Hydra guards walking down the stairs from the second floor. Scott didn't dare to speak when he saw this and hid in the gap of Steve's hood. Steve pretended to be calm and did not show the slightest panic. Instead, he continued to walk up the stairs. The Hydra team and Steve met each other on the stairs, one up and one down. "It's you." The leader of the guards stopped and looked at Steve. Because they were all wearing protective hoods, they couldn't see each other's faces, but Steve's S immediately attracted his attention. "Oh no." Scott, who was hiding on Steve, was aware of the danger of exposure and couldn't help but wipe the sweat for Steve. Just as he was ready for this encounter, he heard Steve say a serious sentence, "Long live Hydra." Steve's tone was calm and confident, and it was very infectious. He really sounded like a warrior who was loyal to Hydra. At this time, even if Red Skull Schmidt was present, he probably wouldn't believe that he was an infiltrator. Long live Hydra. The leader of the guards nodded with satisfaction, exchanged the slogan with Steve, and then left with the team downstairs. Steve heaved a sigh of relief. He had managed to escape and walked upstairs unhurriedly. "Captain. You're amazing." Scott was stunned. "What is acting?" "This is acting. Learn from me." Steve smiled and felt that he always had to shout Hydra's S.S. "I can't learn this, I can't learn this." Scott shook his head and gave Steve a thumbs up and said with emotion, "You should be the Oscar." The two continued to sneak upstairs. At this time, outside the military fortress, hundreds and thousands of Hydra guards were on the ground, moving around like flies. Even though they couldn't see any enemies, small missiles fell from the sky, bombarding the Hydra guards one after another. The continuous bombardment made the Hydra guards suffer. Thousands of meters above the military fortress, Iron Man, wearing a new type of retractable Mark armor, had a triangular rectangular light on his chest, and small missiles equipped on his left and right shoulders continued to carpet bomb the ground below. At this height, with the current armor of the Hydra guards, let alone attack, it was difficult for them to even observe and investigate. They were completely at their mercy. Caesar put his hands in his pockets and floated idly. While Tawny launched a new round of bombing, Caesar dialed the communicator. "Steve, how's the situation on your side? Red Skull Schmidt hasn't been found yet. He should still be inside. Please increase the intensity." Steve reported. "Increase the intensity?" Caesar looked at Iron Man and suddenly thought of something and flew quickly to the mountains next to him. But after a while, Tawny just got rid of the small missile loader that consumed the small missile and heard a buzzing sound behind him. He looked back in surprise, and when he saw the thing in front of him, he opened his mouth exaggeratedly. It can be seen that under the cover of the night, a small mountain is buzzing and suspended, and it is nearly a kilometer high. The small figure carrying the mountain below is Caesar. Chapter 458. Caesar carried a small mountain of rocks weighing dozens of tons with both hands. After having the experience of carrying a helicopter aircraft carrier, he felt that the current small mountain was not as heavy as he imagined. In response to Tawny's question, Caesar replied with ease, "Sorry, this is not making meteorites, this is definitely more exciting than meteorites." As soon as he finished speaking, Caesar had already flown to Tawny's side, that is, 1,000 meters above the sky. A pair of small white hands clasped the rock mountain that was more than 100 times larger than his own body, and he shouted with all his strength, and then suddenly smashed the mountain down on the military base below. Hoo-hoo-hoo! Caesar was suspended in the air, his waist rotated slightly, his hands were still in the posture of swinging down, and circles of visible white air waves rippled under his body. The rock mountain that was irrigated with the power of Superman immediately blew a whistling local storm, and even Tawny, who was wearing an Iron Man armor next to him, retreated with numbness in his scalp. Under Tawny's horrified gaze, the small mountain fell at a speed far faster than a meteorite, and its head buzzed and rubbed with a scorching light and heat. Carrying a violent impact force, it rushed straight to the open space of the military fortress at the bottom. How is this making meteorites? This is the power of a real meteorite. Outside the military fortress building, in the vast open space where vehicles and supplies were stored, the Hydra guards were still looking for cover everywhere to avoid the attack of an unknown enemy. The leading officer in charge hid beside a truck, picked up an old-style communication device, and dialed Red Skull Schmidt in the command room. "What's the situation outside?" Schmidt asked. "I don't know, sir, I really don't know." The officer in charge was about to collapse, and he said to the communicator with a dry mouth, "We haven't found the enemy, but the enemy's missiles are still carpet bombing us. For your safety, I suggest you evacuate here as soon as possible." He paused and hesitated. "I even suspect that the enemy is an alien." "Shut up." Schmidt scolded the officer in charge, and then ordered, "Find the enemy as soon as possible and deal with him. Even if he is an alien, you have to hand over his head." "Yes, sir." As soon as the officer in charge finished responding, he suddenly felt that the Hydra guards around him were all in a daze. The officer couldn't help but follow their gazes. In the pitch-black sky, a scorching fireball appeared. It was like a small sun, rapidly growing larger and larger. Soon, it enveloped the entire area of the fortress, and an extremely oppressive aura rushed towards their heads. "Meteorite." The commanding officer muttered to himself as he held the communicator. Schmidt, who was on the other side of the communicator, clearly heard the conversation. He asked in surprise, "What meteorite? Speak clearly." "The meteorite is coming, sir." "Run." The chief officer only had time to finish this sentence before the 5 fingers of his left hand loosened, and the communicator in his hand slipped to the ground. He raised his head with tears streaming down his face. Like the other Hydra Guardians, he looked at the falling meteor in despair. In front of a natural disaster, laser guns, protective suits, all of them seemed weak and powerless. Even escaping seemed futile, so they could only silently wait for death. The moment the burning meteorite crashed into the open space of the fortress at high speed, it was as if tons of explosives had been detonated on the surface of the ground at the same time. Hundreds of Hydra Guardians were instantly turned into minced meat. Boom! The unparalleled impact completely lifted the mud, stones, and dust waves. The powerful and terrifying aftershock swept through the air and the earth in all directions. The surface of the steel fortress, which could be called the strongest military fortress at the moment, was immediately riddled with holes after being hit by the aftershock of the nearby meteorite. Endless waves of dust, under the whistling wind, smashed the doors and windows and forcefully poured into the fortress. Red Skull Schmidt, who was in the commander's room, was still puzzled by the message conveyed by the officer. But in the next moment, the entire building was shaking under the impact of the impact. The dim electric lights flickered and swayed everywhere. The tables, chairs, and documents placed in the room were thrown up in a mess. Meteorite. It was really a meteorite attack. Schmidt's hands held the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles turned white. His gloomy eyes were filled with confusion. Why did the meteorite from outer space go against him when he had just made some progress? There was no time to think, he had to make a decision immediately. As soon as the earthquake caused by the impact stopped, Schmidt took a deep breath, quickly picked up the box containing the tesseract, took the key to his personal car, and walked out of the messy commander's room without looking back. At this time, on the second floor of the fortress building, the waves of gravel and dust that were poured in were roaring and raging. Steve lay on the iron mesh floor with his hands clasped tightly to the floor. Scott, who had turned into the size of an ant, was also nervously hiding behind Steve's head. The two of them didn't dare to breathe loudly until the earthquake stopped. Waves of dust lingered in the factory like a fog. Steve coughed violently a few times, got up from the ground again, patted off the dust on his body, and looked outside through the broken window. In the open space, there was a huge bottomless pit. The radius of the pit was at least 30 meters. If it had come a little closer, the fortress building would have been flattened. Just now, what was that? Scott lay on Steve's shoulder and groaned in shock. It's most likely Caesar's doing. He's the only one who can do this. The corner of Steve's mouth twitched slightly. He asked Caesar and Tawny to increase the intensity of the bombardment, but only to maintain the status quo of the bombardment just now. He didn't expect Caesar to take it seriously and use the mountain as a meteorite to bombard the Hydra fortress base. That smash just now must have buried at least hundreds of Hydra guards in the crater, right? If this was recorded in the history books of the future, it would probably become the biggest unsolved mystery on Earth. I don't know what to say anymore. Scott patted his head and smiled bitterly. Tap tap tap. At this moment, someone quickly walked down from the third floor. Steve turned around, and the man just happened to walk in front of him. After seeing him, he handed over a car key and a suitcase, and said in a commanding tone, "Go to the underground garage and start my special car, I want to leave here immediately." Looking at the familiar man in front of him, Steve couldn't help but be stunned. Fortunately, there was a tingling in his ear in time, waking him up. Steve took the car key and the suitcase, and nodded respectfully in response. "Yes, sir. Hurry up, I'll wait for you at the back door of the base." Before the man finished speaking, he walked downstairs quickly. After the man walked away, Scott came out from Steve's helmet, patted his undulating chest, and said, "That was close. What happened?" "Captain, you almost exposed yourself just now." Steve said with a slightly hoarse voice, "That was Red Skull Schmidt." "What did you say?" This time, it was Scott's turn to be stunned. He lowered his head and looked at the suitcase in Steve's hand with an incredulous expression. "No way, so, the suitcase you're holding now is the Tesseract?" Chapter 459. Universal Magic, they got it so easily. And it was Red Skull Schmidt himself who handed it to them personally. Would he be unhappy if they didn't take it? Opening the silver suitcase a little to confirm the contents, when he saw the Rubik's Cube lying in it and emitting a mysterious blue light, Steve was convinced that they really got it. Worried that Red Skull Schmidt would come back and attack them, Steve didn't stay for long. Taking the suitcase with the Rubik's Cube, he and Scott came out of the military fortress base. The escape process was also very smooth, without any accidents or obstacles. The four of them followed the plan and met up in the original forest. When Caesar and Tawny learned about the process of Steve getting the Rubik's Cube, they also didn't know what to say when they heard that even Ant-Man Scott didn't do anything during the whole process. Scott gloated, "I can guarantee that Red Skull Schmidt won't be able to sleep tonight. Not only won't he be able to sleep, even if he's lying in bed, he'll bite and bite the wood to vent." Tawny, who was still wearing Mark's new battle suit, shrugged and happily agreed. "It's none of your business whether he can sleep or not." Steve rolled his eyes, pointed at the suitcase, looked at Tawny, then at Scott, and said in a deep voice, "Since our mission here has been accomplished, we should now hurry back to the original spacetime. After all, the future world is a mess, many people are still waiting for us to go back and save them. Yes, it's time to go back. Spacetime travel ends here." Tawny and Scott sighed softly, and then together with Steve, the three of them looked at Caesar. Caesar avoided their gazes, his body floating in the air, his hands in his trouser pockets, his small face didn't show any reluctance. He said indifferently, "Why are you looking at me? Since you're in a hurry to go back, then leave a tube of PIM particles and spacetime travel equipment, and you can go first." "Little Godfather," Tawny whispered to himself. Suddenly, he walked forward and hugged Caesar's little body. He even rubbed his chin against his cute little face. "Wow. Disgusting." Caesar grumbled in disgust. His little hand pushed Tawny's stubbly chin away. "Why are you getting sadder as you age?" Steve and Scott looked at each other and smiled. They also took a step forward and hugged Caesar and Tawny. The four of them hugged each other and could feel each other's warmth. The future Steve said solemnly, "Caesar, take good care of yourself." The future Tawny smiled and said softly, "This time, it's really goodbye forever." The future Scott laughed heartily. "The next time you see me, it won't be the current me, alright, stop being so annoying. Hurry up and go back to your original spacetime." Although Caesar said that, the corners of his mouth curled up. There was sadness in his gem-like eyes. That's right. They were in different parallel spacetimes. They were not supposed to meet. Even if they did, it would be fleeting. In the blink of an eye, they would go their separate ways. This time, it would be an eternal farewell. Then, goodbye, Caesar. Ant-Man Scott waved his hand at Caesar. Holding the suitcase containing the Tesseract and the miniaturized versions of Tony and Steve, he pressed the button to start the space-time travel. His body quickly shrank from big to small, and soon he completely disappeared into the forest. Caesar floated silently in place. After a few seconds, he whispered to himself, "The mess from the future has finally been cleaned up. Now, do what you want to do." Caesar raised his head and looked at the sky. He accelerated on the spot, sweeping away the fallen leaves and branches on the ground. Wrapped in the howling wind, he dragged a comet-like air tail and disappeared into the vast night sky at supersonic speed after a short while. 5 minutes later. America's military training base. It was close to midnight. It was time for the training soldiers to rest. The base was quiet. There were only a few armed soldiers patrolling around. No one noticed that a small figure, as light and agile as a bird, landed on the rooftop of the old 3-story building from the night sky. This scene is really nostalgic. Caesar looked down at the entire training base. He sighed. This was the first stop of his original body's rebirth. It was also the place where his original body was born. The original body of the current spacetime is probably still secretly thinking about how to draw an ability card from that soldier or instructor. Caesar smiled. But the reason he came to the current spacetime was not to see the original body of the current spacetime. There was no meaning in that. Every parallel spacetime only needed one protagonist, even if the original body of the current spacetime had not yet entered the battlefield. I remember that she lives in the officers' quarters. She seems to be on the 2nd floor. Caesar muttered to himself. His eyes glowed faintly as he fully displayed the clairvoyance ability of his superhuman vision. The walls and bunkers in front of him were all blown away like smoke, revealing the people and objects in the houses. It only took half a second. Caesar found the target he was looking for. He flew down from the rooftop and arrived in front of an officer's quarters. Caesar stopped in front of a room on the 2nd floor. Through the open window, he could see a short-haired woman lying on the bed in a single room. She was sleeping soundly with a quilt in her arms. Carter Page. At that moment, Caesar was slightly stunned. His heart that was as firm as a rock was suddenly poked by something. Caesar did not make any sound. He quietly passed through the window and entered Carter's single room. A faint, familiar fragrance floated in the room. Caesar sniffed lightly. Only then did he realize that no matter how strong she usually appeared, a woman was still a woman. There was an open file on the desk. It was not covered. Caesar glanced at it and his body trembled slightly. A name was written on the file, Cale Doff. It was also circled countless times. Was this the beginning of everything? Caesar floated to the side of the bed and looked at the woman lying on the bed. The sleeping Carter was far from the image of the female officer in his impression. She was less strong-willed and more delicate. She was less stubborn and more affectionate. "Page. I'm back." Caesar called out softly. This simple sentence was separated by many layers of identity and spacetime. Ever since the parting in the wheat field before Kyle's main body left Earth, Carter was destined to become a regret that he could never make up for in his life. Even to this day, he was still brooding over this regret. It was also the only reason why the doppelganger Caesar followed Steve and others to the current World War II spacetime. Traveling through spacetime, just to see you. Caesar slowly leaned forward and stroked Carter's face with his small hand. If you could do it all over again, would you regret meeting Cale? Forget it, I'll leave this answer to you in this spacetime to slowly answer it. Carter's eyelashes trembled slightly. She woke up from her dream and opened her beautiful eyes. She saw the beautiful moonlight outside the window. The silver moonlight shone on the windowsill. Carter frowned slightly and touched the left side of her face. There was a drop of water on it that had not yet dried. For Carter, someone as powerful as Kale still shed a tear. It was the only tear. Chapter 460. After Caesar saw Carter, he also solved the wish of the original Kale. After this, Caesar did not choose to continue to stay in the training base. Instead, he went to a nearby mountain peak and chose a quiet and suitable environment. He was ready to use a space-time protective suit, a space-time navigation watch, and the only PIM particle left behind by the future Steve and others to return to his original 2012 New York space-time. Little Godfather, remember, when you return to the original space-time, you must follow the steps I said. Caesar's mind and ears faintly rang the solemn words left by the future Tawny before he left. Although as long as you have the complete set of space-time travel tools in hand, the operation is very simple and easy to understand, but if there is any mistake, you will never be able to return to the original space-time. First of all, put on the space-time watch, find the button to release the space-time protective suit on the watch, and activate it. Caesar followed the instructions of the future Tawny. He first put the space-time watch on his left wrist and pressed the start button of the space-time protection. Buzz fibers began to release from Caesar's left wrist, comfortably attached to the body's surface, and quickly extended to his chest and limbs, forming a substantial white protective suit that wrapped his undeveloped young body. The Ant-Man's miniaturization technology is really convenient in the future. Caesar secretly sighed, put on the matching helmet, and methodically carried out the remaining steps of the future Tawny's instructions. The second step. Gently put the PIM particle into the groove at the waist of the space-time protective suit. The third step. Generally speaking, you need to adjust the time and place you want to go on the space-time navigation watch. But because Little Godfather, you started from the original space-time, you only need to trace back to the last space-time point you have stayed. The fourth step. Press the space-time travel button on the watch. As long as there are no accidents, you can safely return to your original space-time after a few seconds. Caesar completed the above steps one by one. When he reached the last point, he couldn't help but shake his head and complain, "Tawny, don't jinx it." Goodbye, New York time and space in 1944. After taking one last look at the training base in the distance, Caesar was completely mentally prepared. He immediately turned on the switch, and his body rapidly shrank until he completely entered the quantum realm. The quantum domain was a vast and mysterious area. It was grotesque and variegated, as if it had no concept of time and space. Caesar was like an extremely tiny electric particle, shuttling at a high speed, jumping from one quantum vortex to another. Light gradually appeared in front of him. Just when Caesar thought that he had successfully traveled back to the original spacetime, the vortex in the quantum domain suddenly became distorted as if it was affected by some force. With a violent jolt and a sense of contrast, the light in front of him dimmed and went out in the blink of an eye. Caesar was stunned. From a high-speed state, he moved forward at a slow speed. Soon, his body stopped in the quantum domain and did not move at all. Caesar hurriedly touched the groove on his waist and took out the glass tube. The PIM particles in the tube had basically been exhausted, leaving only about 1/3 of the remaining. This made Caesar's little face stiffen. "Tawny, it can't be. Did the accident you mentioned really happen?" Looking at the navigation device on his left wrist, a series of error codes flashed on the screen of the watch, and then the screen went out. Obviously, there was a malfunction and it could no longer be used. "This is really bad." Caesar's mouth twitched slightly, but he did not panic too much. Since his rebirth, he had encountered all kinds of storms. He was just trapped in the quantum domain, and he would find a way to go back. He tried to fly on his own. Caesar was pleasantly surprised to find that in the quantum domain, he still had superhuman strength. He could fly freely, and it could completely replace the power and energy of traveling through space-time. However, there was still a problem that could not be avoided. The space-time navigation watch malfunctioned, and this made Caesar unable to confirm the quantum domain intermediate point of the original space-time and find the correct quantum vortex to travel out. For example, there were trillions of tree holes in the quantum domain, and there was only one that was connected to the original spacetime of Marvel, New York in 2012, but now the coordinate navigation was gone. Caesar flew in the quantum domain for several hours, looking at the same colorful vortices, and he suddenly understood the seriousness of the current situation. This was the quantum domain. It was space-time wandering, not the pure starry sky wandering of the past. He might not be able to go back to the original space-time. Wait. Caesar suddenly thought of something, raised his eyebrows, and murmured, "In the future of Steve and the others, there is no existence of me. Is it because of this?" It was not that he might not be able to go back, but that he really could not go back. Caesar showed a helpless expression and looked at the many quantum domain vortices around him. The most important thing now was to get out of the quantum domain. Can I only rely on luck and choose a random vortex point to go out? Caesar was a little hesitant. There were too many uncertainties in spacetime. If he randomly chose a vortex point to go out, the spacetime he arrived in was likely to be the distant past of the Marvel Universe, or the distant future of the Marvel Universe. It was even possible that he would arrive in a parallel universe that was not Marvel. Now, I don't seem to have a choice. Caesar smiled bitterly. In his current situation, there seemed to be no other choice but to leave his fate to luck. If he delayed any longer, he, who had the blood of a Kryptonian, was afraid that he would starve to death in the quantum domain. Then, it's you. Caesar took a quick glance and picked a quantum vortex that was pleasing to the eye. Without hesitation, he accelerated his flight and plunged directly into it. This was a luxurious classical Western-style building built in a bustling city. It was already 2:00 in the morning, and the inside and outside of the house were covered in darkness. Only a little moonlight spilled through the windows into the hall. But at this time, the kitchen on the first floor was still dimly lit. A boy of about 6 or 7 years old noticed this. His thin body was still wearing pajamas, and he was holding a long wooden stick the size of a wrist in his hand. Full of vigilance, he raised it above his head and carefully walked down the spiral staircase from the second floor to the first floor. The boy went down to the kitchen on the first floor to check. He saw a middle-aged woman in a red dress opening the old-style refrigerator in the kitchen and rummaging through something. He could not help but be surprised. "Mom? It's so late. What are you doing?" The woman's body trembled slightly, and she looked at the boy expressionlessly. The boy smiled in relief, put down the wooden stick in his hand, and walked forward. He said casually, "I thought it was a thief." "I didn't scare you, did I?" "Honey, I'm just looking for something to eat." The woman held the refrigerator with one hand and put the other hand on her waist. She looked at the boy kindly and persuaded him. "Go to sleep." The smile on the boy's face dissipated. He stopped 3 meters away and looked at the woman solemnly. This made the woman a little confused. She continued, "What's wrong?" "Go to sleep." As if she felt that her tone and behavior were not like a mother's, the woman squatted down slightly and looked at the boy intimately. She said as gently as she could, "I'll make you a cup of hot chocolate." "Who are you?" The boy narrowed his eyes and was even more certain of his guess. He stepped forward in a questioning manner. "What did you do to my mom?" The woman did not know where she exposed herself. She looked at the boy in surprise, and then she felt an invisible pressure crushing her. He was a boy who was not even 7 years old, but there was a strong power in him. He was obviously angry. His mouth did not move, but he directly conveyed his thoughts. "My mom won't step into the kitchen, and she won't make hot chocolate for me. She'll only order me to do these things." The woman subconsciously covered her throbbing head and kept taking a few steps back. The boy's last thought seemed to have touched her soft heart. The woman sighed softly, raised her hands, and removed the camouflage ability on her body. As the pores on her body changed, her body shrank. Her pupils returned to brown, her shoulder-length hair returned to dark red, and her skin returned to dark blue. She looked like a girl about 6 years old. Looking at the girl who was different from ordinary people, the boy was first surprised, then excited, and finally laughed. He whispered, "I never believed that I was the only one in the world who was different from others." The blue-skinned girl looked at the boy in surprise. The boy smiled and took the initiative to reach out his hand. He introduced himself, "My name is Charles Xavier." "My name is Ruiwen." The girl hesitated, but still held Charles's hand. "You must be hungry. Eat whatever you want in the kitchen." Charles took Ruiwen's hand and smiled. "There's a lot of delicious food in my house. You don't have to go hungry tonight. No, in fact, you won't have to go hungry in the future." Ruiwen felt warmth for the first time. She could not help but smile cutely. At this moment, a small meteor fell from the sky, cut through the night sky, and finally crashed into the luxurious manor's courtyard at high speed. Boom! The splashing mud hit the window. Charles and Ruiwen in the kitchen on the first floor were shocked. They looked at each other. Charles gathered his courage and took the lead to open the door to the courtyard. There was a deep circular pit in the middle of the courtyard with grass and green plants. Grass and mud were scattered everywhere. Steam was still rising from the circular pit. Under the shocked gaze of Charles and Ruiwen, a small hand reached out from the pit, followed by a head. Soon, a blond boy of about 5 years old climbed out of the pit. After smashing a hole in the ground, the blond boy stood up again as if nothing had happened. He patted off the dust on his damaged protective suit and asked Charles and the other man beside him, "Hey, kid, where is this? I mean the year, and the detailed location." Charles smiled brightly and replied, "October 21, 1944, Westchester, New York." Chapter 461. 2013, New York. Half a year had passed since the end of the horrifying war in New York. The central city that had been reduced to ruins of the apocalypse had been completely restored and looked even more prosperous. Ultramodern buildings with extraterrestrial characteristics rose from the ruins, towering into the clouds in a magnificent manner. They shone under the sunlight like interstellar coordinates. The war in New York was not just an extraterrestrial battle. The significance of determining the outcome was also the watershed between the old era and the new era. It was the era when Earth and extraterrestrials were connected, as Kale, the symbol of peace, had said. After the cruel baptism of this war, humans were finally forced to accept that they were not the only intelligent creatures in the universe and that Earth was not the only light of civilization in the universe. They were not alone. While the extraterrestrial forces posed a fatal threat to humans, they also exposed the superhero forces hidden in New York, the Avengers, to the public. Captain America Steve Rogers, the benchmark of World War II soldiers and current SHELD agent, Black Widow Natasha Romanoff, former Soviet Red Room agent and former deputy director of SHELD, Hawkeye Clinton Barton, current agent of SHELD agent, Falcon Sam Wilson, former United States Secret Air Force agent, Hulk Bruce Banner, former university professor and cutting-edge gamma-ray researcher, Black Demon Eddie Bullock, current news staff member of the Unnatural Agency. Thor, Norse mythology, U.S. Colonel and Iron Man's best friend, War Machine James Rhodes, etc. These superheroes' dazzling performance in defeating the extraterrestrial army during the war in New York also gave humans a certain amount of confidence and did not cause social panic. Especially the supernova hero of Family Cal, Caesar, the son of the symbol of peace. He was less than 5 years old, but he stopped the falling aircraft carrier by himself. Caesar stopped the aircraft carrier with his hands and shoulders on the outskirts of New York. A video of this miraculous act was captured by witnesses and was crazily forwarded and viewed more than 100 million times on the internet. He was praised and sought after by the public. Caesar was also known as the strongest force to protect Earth in the new era. Superman Caesar. The strongest hero, second only to the symbol of peace, Kale, was fully deserving of the title. The only pity was that Loki, the evil god who had started the war in New York, had escaped from Earth with the Tesseract. At the same time, Superman Caesar also inexplicably disappeared from New York. Fortunately, after the war in New York, the world had returned to peace in the past 6 months. Immediately. SHELD headquarters, located in downtown New York, in a conference room near the top floor. Steve, who was wearing a tight-fitting blue uniform, and Natasha, who was wearing a black leather uniform, were sitting on the sofa with their legs crossed. They were reporting their recent work to SHELD Director Fry. Steve said in a deep voice, "Chief. Your guess is right. Even now, in some corners of the world, there are still remnants of Hydra. Of course. If you want to completely wipe out the remnants of Hydra, you will have to kill all humans on Earth." Director Fry was not surprised by this. If they were so easy to eradicate, they wouldn't be called Hydra. Yes. The current situation is much better than before. We don't have to be on guard against those bastards Hydra every day. Natasha smiled and said coldly, but taking advantage of the aftermath of the war in New York, they can't help but come out to stir up trouble. Steve spread out his hands and seconded, "Natasha, Barton, and Sam, the 4 of us have been running back and forth all over the world for a while." Director Fry pondered for a moment and said lightly, "Hiding in the dark and making small moves, this is not what they want to see." "You mean, the remnants of Hydra still have a backup plan, and they may make big moves in the future?" Steve and Natasha looked at each other, and both of them were a little more alert, but after the war with the alien forces, they no longer regarded the remnants of Hydra as their #1 enemy. "Well, you don't have to work today, go home and have a good rest." After the completion of the report, Director Fry granted Steve and others a week-long vacation. "Let's go for a drink tonight?" Steve looked at Natasha, and Natasha smiled charmingly and said, "No problem." While the 3 people in the conference hall were still talking, the glass of water on the table suddenly trembled slightly, and ripples spread out in circles. "This is?" Steve and others looked at each other in surprise. They could feel that the whole building was trembling, especially the tempered floor-to-ceiling windows, which were constantly buzzing and almost cracked. Outside, the sky. Steve and Natasha reacted very quickly. They got up one after the other and quickly walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. They looked up at the blue sky and saw 2 dark clouds covering the sun. They were still descending and landing on the open space in front of the headquarters. Alien spaceships? Fry narrowed his eyes solemnly. The 2 dark clouds were 2 space warships with roaring engines. Natasha was stunned for a moment. When she saw the outline of one of the spaceships clearly, she couldn't hide her excitement and blurted out, "It's the Master. It's the Master's space warship, they're back." SHELD headquarters, in front of the door. The travel-worn Eagle and orange-yellow warships slowly landed on the open space. Fortunately, the square was spacious enough and isolated from the bustling city outside. Otherwise, who knew what kind of commotion it would cause? Director Fry walked at the front with Steve and Natasha following closely behind. There were more than 10 SHELD executives behind them. When everyone got close to the warships, the rear hatch of the Eagle opened from the deck. A very eye-catching young man with silver hair and golden eyes, wearing simple casual clothes, a tall and handsome figure, and a pair of sunglasses walked down from the deck as if he had just returned from a vacation. Beside the silver-haired young man, there was a beautiful and cute blonde girl who was holding his arm intimately with both hands. Natasha took a step forward with a trembling voice and called out, "Master." How have you been? How have you been all these years? Looking at Fry and the others who came out to welcome him, Kale, who had just returned from the Milky Way Alliance, couldn't help but reveal a faint smile. It felt good to be home. Steve quickly walked forward, clenched his fist, and lightly punched Kale's chest. He said emotionally, "Kale, you're finally back. I can't possibly steal your limelight on Earth for a long time, right?" Kale teased, raised his chin, and said, "I'm not the only one who's back, there's an old acquaintance as well." An old acquaintance? Steve looked behind Kale in surprise. A few more people walked down from the Eagle. One of them wore glasses, had a sexy stubble on his chin, and was also wearing casual clothes. Who else could it be but Tony Stark? However, at this moment, Tony was supporting a white-haired old man. Chapter 462. Looking at Steve, who was still in a daze, the old man slapped away Tony's hand that was supporting him. He walked over cheerfully and joked, "Captain, you and Kale are still the same, young and handsome. I'm the only one who's old, so old that even you can't recognize me." "How can I not recognize you? How can I?" Steve looked excited. He opened his arms and hugged the old man's thin body. "Mr. Howard, long time no see." "That's right, long time no see. You're still using the battle suit and shield I made?" Howard sighed. His gaze moved down and landed on the 5-star round shield on Steve's back. Similarly, the round shield with the 5-star silver shield had not changed because of the passage of time and had witnessed history. Howard, Logan, and Lucy. The three of them had been back and forth for almost half a century. Compared to ordinary people, that was half a lifetime. Someone walked down from the rear cabin of the Eagle. It was a skinny man with short hair and a little white bear sitting on his shoulder. He walked to the side behind Kale and nodded at Fry and Natasha. He greeted them in a deep voice, "Fry, Natasha, long time no see." "Logan." Frey's eyes lit up when he saw the wolf-like man with short hair. Kale and Logan standing together made him vaguely recall the battle scenes during World War II. "Chief Instructor, you're finally back." Seeing her old friends returning, Natasha smiled even more. Her heart was filled with excitement. She still remembered that when she first joined Family Cal, she and Logan were the instructors of the Family Cal and trained a group of elite members. "You still remember the others, but you've completely forgotten about me, right?" The blonde girl holding Kale's arm puffed up her cheeks and wrinkled her nose in dissatisfaction. She did not give face to Chief Fry at all. She glared at them with her beautiful gem-like eyes. Natasha looked at the blonde girl again. She felt that she was familiar. Now that she heard the familiar and pleasant voice, she was slightly surprised. "You are, my mother, Miss Lucy?" Lucy did not comment and snorted lightly, showing the attitude of a young girl. "It's really Miss Lucy. We haven't seen each other for 50 or 60 years, right?" Frey's dark and serious face had a bitter smile. Because Howard had aged a lot, even Logan had aged 10 years. Only Lucy seemed to have aged in reverse like Kale. Time did not leave any traces on her appearance and body, so he didn't recognize her directly before. The last gathering of all of them was just after World War II, when Kale left the Earth. It's now 2013, and 70 years seem to have passed in the blink of an eye. Kale's heart was filled with emotion. After crossing the century, many of his loved ones and old friends are still there, which may be the most fortunate thing. Otherwise, even if he is invincible in starry sky, no one to share and no one to protect him, it would be empty talk full of loneliness and sadness. "We're on my home planet, guys." Following the Eagle, the space fighter that descended to the open space of the square also opened its aft deck. Star-Lord Quill walked in front with Yondu, Brown Bear Rocket, Alien Green Peak, Sister Mantis, and Drax the Destroyer, and the group came to the SHELD square. Whether it is their appearance or dressing, they are different from ordinary people, attracting many SHELD agents' vigilant scrutiny. So, this is a large senior citizen party? Quill looked at Kale and the others in a daze. Most of them were familiar faces that he had seen in the newspaper when he was a child, and he was speechless. Kale, it seems that you not only successfully brought back Howard and the others, but also brought back an additional team of aliens? Fry saw Quill and the others and couldn't help but say to Kale. Before Kale could respond, Quill shouted in dissatisfaction, "I'm not an alien, I'm a native Earthling." Brown Bear Rocket covered his mouth and whispered, "It's not so much an Earthling, it's better to say that you're a planet-made human." Furry Bear, what are you talking about? Quill obviously heard it and immediately got angry and stared at Rocket excitedly. "It's okay to behave atrociously on my spaceship, but now you've come to my territory." Rocket glared back, not convinced. "There's a fight to be had. Are you going to use a knife or a gun? Come on, who's afraid of who?" Quill rolled up his sleeves. If it wasn't for the destroyer between the two, he would have really fought with Rocket. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, Quill and Rocket were still staring at each other, neither willing to give in to the other. Although they're considered aliens, they're a bunch of idiots. They're no threat to Earth or even New York. Kale patted Frey's shoulder and explained, for some reason, they want to lie low on Earth for a while and will leave after a while. Okay. Since you've given your word, then leave everything to me. Fry stared at Kale and asked again, after returning to Earth this time, they won't run away again, right? Steve and Natasha heard this and both looked at Kale, waiting for his answer. Kale pondered for a moment, held Lucy's warm and soft hand, and replied, "Not for the time being." Since Thanos had made his move so early, he could not continue to wait for death. He had to be fully prepared to fight on Earth's home ground. That's good, Fry said. Steve and Natasha also breathed a sigh of relief. The haze that had been lingering between their brows finally disappeared. The return of the symbol of peace, Kale, Iron Man, Tawny, Logan, and the others undoubtedly gave them a boost. They did not have to worry about whether they could stop the next wave of the alien army every day. Kale was like the embodiment of the symbol of peace. As long as he was on Earth, there would be peace. Not only did the general public believe this, but even the superheroes of the Avengers firmly agreed with this. It was not just Kale's extraordinary powers and abilities, but also because he had created too many miracles. His charisma alone was enough to make people admire him to the point of almost believing in him. Fry suggested, "Kale, it's not good to talk outside. Let's go upstairs to SHELD and have a seat first. A lot of things have happened recently, and we need to discuss them with you." "No, another day." Kale refused and said, "I just came back today. I'll take Lucy and the others back to Family Cal first. I'll deal with some things in a few days." It was not just some things. There were too many things that needed to be solved step by step. Kale did not care so much. It had been a long time since he returned to Earth. He would go home and have a good rest first. After all, heroes also needed to rest. But then again, what about the doppelganger Caesar? Ever since Kale returned to Earth, he had not sensed the existence of Superman's doppelganger. Previously, even when they were in the Milky Way alliance, Kale's main body and Caesar's doppelganger had a faint connection. However, this connection was completely cut off half a year ago. Chapter 463. Star-Lord Quill and his party were handed over to Fry to arrange temporary accommodations and identity issues. Tawny returned to the Stark property villa with his father, while Kale, Lucy, Logan, and others returned to the Family Cal branch in New York, which is the headquarters of the Unnatural Agency. Things inside and outside the Earth came to an end, and now they chose to return home first. Kale and others did not intend to block the return message. They all sat in the vehicles provided by SHELD agents, forming a fleet, and left the SHELD headquarters square separately. SHELD Director Fry was even more eager to use the return of Kale and Tawny as a grand peace propaganda to eliminate the shadow and worries of the people about the war in New York. So, almost half an hour after Kale and his party returned to Earth, under the current explosion of multimedia information, almost all people in New York knew about the return of the symbol of peace, Kale, and the super-popular hero, Iron Man. Then, the whole city was in an uproar. On this day, none of the companies that settled in New York were connected. As soon as they learned of Kale's return, all the companies unanimously announced a temporary holiday today in order to celebrate the return of the symbol of peace. New York Central Radio and the advertising media in various streets uniformly broadcast the commemorative song of the Roaring Commandos. The passionate tunes and notes flowed in every corner of the streets of New York. The statues of the symbol of peace standing with swords all over the streets looked as if they were about to come alive. In such a joyous atmosphere that felt like a major festival, people from 80 years old to 8-year-old children, wearing devil card t-shirts related to Kyle, walked on the streets in a mighty manner and ran around to spread the news, cheering excitedly. Welcome home, the symbol of peace. Perhaps even SHELD has far underestimated Kale's influence and the meaning of his existence. The continuous accumulation and deification of his charisma had long allowed Kale to break away from the framework of a superhero. He was more like an eternal guardian god, the belief of man and God in the hearts of the masses. This halo was a height that no one had ever reached in the past. The lively atmosphere in the streets of New York was no less than Christmas. Media personnel from all over the country flew to New York on the same day and blocked the door of the Unnatural Agency, wanting to get a chance to interview Kale himself. Yu Tong, on the other hand, was prepared. She announced in advance that the Unnatural firm would be closed for 3 days, and no one other than Family Cal was allowed to enter the building. They also sent the only person in charge of the news in the Unnatural firm, Black Demon Eddie, to represent the Unnatural firm to deal with the major media. Eddie was obviously having a headache. He stood alone at the door. The cameras and microphones around him were all aimed at him. The fanatical media reporters were like a tide, trying to drown him completely. On this day, for the first time, Eddie, who was a media professional, felt a deep hatred for media reporters. In the conference room on the top floor of the Unnatural firm building, Yu Tong, who was wearing a long black dress, and Lucy, who was wearing a long white dress, both had beautiful and exquisite looks. The style of the East and the West was very different. At this time, they sat together hand in hand and whispered to each other. At the end of World War II, Yu Tong was still a little girl, and Lucy was already the mother in charge of the family. Now, half a century later, Yu Tong looked like a charming and sexy beauty, and Lucy still retained the innocence and purity of a young girl. It was as if the roles had been reversed. Before this, Care's heart was still slightly perturbed. He didn't expect Yu Tong and Lucy's relationship to be so harmonious. They were like sisters who were as close as brothers. Family Cal, you've worked hard. At that time, I was the hands-off manager and pushed all the work that should have been done by me to you. Lucy held Yu Tong's hand gently and said apologetically, I don't feel tired. Yu Tong smiled faintly and said, if it wasn't for Family Cal's work, I'm afraid I would have gone with you and gone to find boss. Yes. But no matter what, our family is finally reunited. Lucy said happily. Kale nodded gently and looked at Lucy, Yu Tong, and Logan sitting in the hall. Wasn't this the scale of Family Cal when they first established it? There wasn't one more person, and there wasn't one less person. Everything was just right. It was just a difference of 70 years. Everything is finally back to normal. Kale sighed softly. By the way, boss. Yu Tong seemed to have thought of something and looked at Kale with her beautiful eyes. Her beautiful face was slightly solemn. She said, "About Caesar and the battle in New York, I have to tell you first." "Okay, tell me." Kale agreed immediately. When he returned to Earth, many people, including Fry and Steve, had already mentioned the battle in New York. He also wanted to know what the current version of the battle in New York was like in the Marvel world that was affected by him. In the next 10 minutes, Yutong recounted the whole process, from evil god Loki coming to New York to take the Rubik's Cube, to using the psychic scepter to control Hawkeye, to the Avengers defeating the alien army, and Loki escaping Earth with the Rubik's Cube. After that battle, many strange things happened. Yutong's eyes flashed with a faint silver light. Obviously, she still didn't understand the series of things that were caused by the battle in New York. Oh, what strange things. Kale was a little curious. This also aroused the curiosity of Lucy and Logan. Yutong said solemnly, when the Avengers and the members of SHELD brought Loki and the Rubik's Cube to the lobby on the first floor for the handover, there was a disturbance. An unknown man disguised as a SHELD agent wanted to take the Rubik's Cube in the chaos, causing the Rubik's Cube to fall under Loki's feet. Because of this, Loki was able to escape from Earth with the Rubik's Cube. Kale asked in surprise, "An unknown man?" There were surveillance records at the headquarters of SHELD, but you still couldn't find him? After all, that was the headquarters of SHELD, and at that time, there were many Avengers members on the scene. Committing a crime under the eyes of the heroes? Yutong shook her head and said, "No, that man disappeared completely after he escaped from the headquarters. Not to mention SHELD, even Family Cal couldn't find him." "What else?" Kale's interest was piqued. Yutong continued, "The second strange thing. Captain Steve met someone who looked exactly like him in the ruins near the headquarters. At first, Captain Steve thought that the person was Loki, who had escaped, so the two of them fought." "There's such a thing?" Logan exclaimed. Yutong nodded and said, "Boss's doppelganger Caesar also disappeared from New York with the person who disguised himself as Captain Steve after he was knocked unconscious. It was as if they had disappeared from the face of the earth, and no one could find any trace of them." Kale fell silent and fell into deep thought. Strange things happened one after another. It was definitely not a coincidence. Chapter 464. More than half a century had passed, and it was now the modern year of 2013. Lucy and Logan were used to seeing the top technology of the Milky Way Alliance. They were not surprised by the earth-shaking changes on Earth. Instead, they felt that it was a matter of course. However, the two of them and Kale were also very curious about the alien forces that invaded Earth and caused the war in New York. Lucy said in a guessing tone, "Can we infer that half a year ago, Kale's doppelganger Caesar and the person who pretended to be Captain America left Earth?" Logan said in a low voice, "There's also the mysterious man who wants to steal the Rubik's Cube. It's very likely that he's in cahoots with that fake America team. After all, they appeared in New York at the same time and disappeared from New York at the same time." Indeed. Lucy and Logan's IQ were online. What they thought was also what Kale was thinking. It made sense that there was a group of mysterious and unknown superhumans who took advantage of the chaos in New York after the alien war to secretly do something behind the backs of the Avengers. So, those people are unknown enemies? Kyle followed the above conjecture to this point, but quickly rejected the idea. The reason was simple. If those infiltrators were enemies, Caesar's doppelganger would not have just stood by and watched. And with Caesar's Krypton bloodline and extraordinary strength, even if he could not defeat all the potential enemies, he would at least have the ability to protect himself. For Caesar's doppelganger to leave with him, it must be voluntary. In other words, the infiltrators were not hostile. In fact, the infiltrators were very likely to be on their side. Kale narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at Yutong sitting opposite him. He found that Yutong was also looking at him. Her dark eyes revealed a deep meaning. Kale suddenly smiled and said, "Yutong, you still have some information that you haven't told us, right? I knew I couldn't hide it from you, boss." Yutong smiled softly and suddenly let go of Lucy's hand. Her hand slightly parted her waist-length black hair, revealing her delicate neck, where she was wearing a normal-looking necklace pendant. "That pendant is a very important item, right?" Lucy suddenly said. "How did you know?" Yutong was surprised to be seen through at once. Lucy blinked and said, "Little Yutong. Because other than clothes and daily necessities, other than the ones given by Kale himself, you don't want to keep anything else by your side. It's been like this since you were a child. So, it must be a very important item to be kept." Yutong didn't say anything. Due to her telepathic ability, she read too much of other people's thoughts. This was the first time that someone had seen the secret that she wanted to hide in her heart. Her fair and beautiful face immediately turned a light pink. Ahem. Logan coughed. He was an experienced person and naturally understood everything, but his EQ was very high and he didn't want to say it out loud. Kale's expression was a little uncomfortable. He touched his nose and asked Lucy, "How do you know that Yutong's pendant was not given by me? Your taste is not that bad." Lucy smiled and lowered her head. Her fingers parted the golden hair hanging on her neck, revealing the sapphire pendant she had been wearing. It was the heart of the ocean that Kale had given her during World War II. Yutong's eyes flashed with envy. Then, she took off the normal-looking pendant from her neck and gently opened the hidden compartment of the pendant, revealing the item inlaid inside the pendant. It was an orange gem, only the size of a fingernail, but it was shining with a crystal-clear luster, overflowing with a mysterious and magical aura, making people want to study it in depth. "That is..." Luo Xiao and Lucy opened their eyes in surprise, feeling familiar. Kale's body trembled. He stood up from his seat and blurted out, "Spirit gem, that's the spirit gem?" After all, in his hands, he already had the space and power gems. It was impossible to mistake the spirit gem. "Yes, it's the spirit gem." Yutong nodded lightly and said, "This gem was taken by Caesar from the spirit staff in the hand of the evil god Loki who invaded the earth. It is said that Caesar swallowed the spirit gem in order to keep it. Since Caesar is gone, how can the spirit gem be in your hands?" Kale was confused. Yutong said solemnly, "On the night of Caesar's disappearance, after I left the unnatural firm, a mysterious man rode thunder and lightning. He entered the room through the floor-to-ceiling window on the top floor of the building and put this gem in my desk drawer. This is the third strange thing I want to say. Spirit gem, someone delivered it to the door. Also riding thunder and lightning?" Kale was silent. The man who could control thunder and lightning, the first person he thought of was undoubtedly Thor. Thor. It's just that with Thor's straightforward temperament, he would never take advantage of Yutong's absence to enter the firm building to return the spirit gem. However, through the above information, at least one thing can be confirmed first. Caesar reasoned, half a year ago, those who sneaked into New York were not enemies. It's likely to be the doppelganger Caesar, who is the person I know. Yutong nodded and said, "I think so too, but who are they and what is their purpose?" Magic cube, spirit gem, it can't be wrong. Their purpose is to get the Infinity Stone. As for the deeper purpose, I hope it's not what I guessed. Kale let out a light breath, his eyes complicated, and said, "As for who they are, I don't know, anyway, they have no malice. The spirit gem is in hand. Plus the space and strength gems in hand, it's exactly half. It's time to create a divine artifact item that can control the gem." Kale quietly clenched his hands and whispered to himself. Thanos sent people to capture Lorna, isn't that forcing him to start a war? Naturally, he will accompany him to the end. Yutong asked, "Boss, What about Caesar? Do we still need to send K2 to look for him? Kale was silent for a moment, then shook his head and said, no need to look for him, withdraw everyone. Doppelganger Caesar is equivalent to himself. Although there is no card draw system, the Krypton bloodline is no joke. Caesar's sudden departure must have his reasons and considerations. Coupled with his extraordinary abilities, Kale doesn't need to worry too much about the safety of his doppelganger. Okay, I got it. Yutong nodded and accepted the order. She looked at Kale, then at Logan and Lucy, smiled and said, you have all left Earth for a long time, take a good rest these days. After a while, I will gather all the members of Family Cal for a family meeting. Okay. Caesar readily agreed. There are too many things to consider, so it's better to rest for a while before making plans. Chapter 465. In the hinterland of the Atlantic Ocean, this is an uninhabited natural island, and the human sea and air transportation routes will not touch it. The sky is spotless blue, the calm sea is sparkling, the coconut trees are swaying under the moist sea breeze, and seagulls and fish are chasing each other in the shallow water beside the island. An ordinary beach chair is placed on the beach, and a silver-haired young man is lying on it. He was wearing a pair of sunglasses that covered half of his handsome face. His muscular body was only wearing a pair of beach shorts. His skin had been tanned into a bronze color by the sun, making his already perfect physique look even stronger and stronger. Russell, along with the sound of footsteps on the sand, Yutong, who was wearing a black secretary uniform with a towering chest and long legs wrapped in black stockings and high heels, suddenly popped out of nowhere from behind. Yutong came to the beach chair, her knees were seamlessly closed, and her uniform skirt wrapped around her round buttocks, and she squatted down slightly. Boss, the drink you asked for, and the information. Yutong whispered softly in the silver-haired young man's ear, and put a glass of iced orange juice in her hand and a file on the small round table. Sorry to trouble you. Kale opened his eyes, took off his sunglasses, picked up the glass and took a sip of juice, leaned back in the chair comfortably, and asked Yutong, where are Lucy and Logan? Why did they disappear after resting for a while? Boss, you have been resting for 2 or 3 months, not for a while. Yutong first corrected him, and then said, Lucy has officially taken over Family Cal's financial work since the day before yesterday, and is now working in the general manager's office of the unnatural firm. As for Logan, he said that he hasn't exercised for a long time, so he drove his own boat and motorcycle and traveled around the world, and now he should have just arrived at sunset. Those two are really diligent. Kale shook his head, picked up the file, and continued to ask, what about Bo, Green Peak, and Star-Lord Quill? How are they doing on Earth now? Yutong said in an unhurried tone, Bo is your subordinate in outer space. I arranged for him to be a trial apprentice. Now he is partners with Eddie and often goes out to New York for missions. His ability and performance are good. As for Green Peak, he is tired of fighting and killing. He is now working in an alien amusement park under Stark Industries. Cosplay is very popular locally and online. Kale is not surprised by Bo's current situation. Although Bo is weak, he has a fighting and upward heart. What he didn't expect is Green Peak, the space pirate captain, Green Peak. Kyle didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Probably not many people knew that there were real aliens in New York amusement parks. Star-Lord Quill and his group were arranged by Fry to live in a retro villa on the outskirts of New York and limit the number of times the other aliens went out except for Quill. This can't be helped. After all, they are basically aliens. Once they are exposed outside, it will be troublesome. Yutong raised her eyebrows gently and stated, they didn't show much in the first 2 or 3 months, but recently, they have become more and more unstable. It seems that they want to leave Earth and go to the Milky Way Alliance. It is estimated that in the past few months, after avoiding the limelight, they can't stay on the comfortable Earth. Kale smiled, knowing the impatience of Quill and his group, and said, "If they want to leave Earth, then let them leave. There is no need to force them to stay." "Okay." Yutong wrote it down, walked behind the sun chair, put her hands on Kale's shoulders, and gently rubbed them. "After 3 months of rest, it's time for me to exercise, otherwise, I will really become a dead fat otaku." Kale enjoyed Yutong's massage and couldn't help but open the information book in his hand. The content inside was the information of several people. Scott Lang, gender, male. Age, 31 years old. Occupation, former system engineer, current prison inmate. Status, former electronic engineering master, engineer with a monthly salary of more than $10,000, jailed for robbery half a year ago, divorced his wife, and has a daughter less than 1 year old, Kathy Lang, Peter Parker, gender, male. Age, 14 years old. Occupation, student. Status, both his parents are dead, and he lives with his legal guardian, Aunt May Parker. Studying at New York 3rd Junior High School, about to graduate this year, rising to high school, no bad habits, but a little too talkative, Stephen Strange, gender, male. Age, 36 years old. Occupation, neurosurgeon. Status, a famous neurosurgeon in New York, a medical doctor from Columbia University, proud, materialistic, diamond bachelor, likes to challenge patients that other doctors can't treat, T'Challa, gender, male. Age, 28 years old. Occupation, Prince of Wakanda. Status, as the son of the King of Wakanda, T'Challa, the only successor of Wakanda, the future King of Wakanda, received a good education from a young age. Currently studying physics at Oxford University, among these 4 people. Some were princes, some were prisoners, some were still studying, and some were already doctorates. There was no connection at all. However, Kale didn't even bother to hold a family meeting, yet he specifically asked for the personal information of these 4 people. There must be a reason for this. Yutong collected all the information in less than half a day. Looking at Kale reading the file meaningfully, Yutong showed a surprised expression and couldn't help but ask, "Boss, among these 4 people, other than Prince T'Challa of Wakanda, who is more special, what about the other 3 is enough to attract your attention?" Kale smiled faintly, put down the file, and said with certainty, "They are special individuals, 1 in a million individuals. Among them, they may still be ordinary people now, but that's just because the opportunity hasn't arrived. Sooner or later, the corresponding extraordinary fate will befall them." Yutong blinked, not fully understanding, and said, "So, we have to wait for the so-called fate to befall them, until they are no longer ordinary people? Waiting has never been your boss, my style." Kale shook his head gently, narrowing his eyes, and said, "There's no time to wait for them. Since the opportunity hasn't arrived, then let me create it." "Then what do you want to do?" Yutong asked. "This file." Kale pulled out Peter Parker's personal file and handed it to Yutong, instructing, "Send this to Tani. Tell him that he will definitely be interested in this boy and let him think about it." "Understood." Yutong took Peter's personal file. As for the rest, Kale looked at the information of the other 3 people in his hand and sighed softly, "Let us do it." Chapter 466. Strange was a neurosurgeon who saved lives and healed the wounded. Yes, even he believed that he saved lives and healed the wounded. Although he was only in his 30s and had only been a doctor for 10 years, Strange could confidently say that if he was only the second best in New York, then no other surgeon would dare to claim to be the best in New York. Strange was undoubtedly a superior and conceited genius. In 10 years, not only did he become famous in the medical field for his neurosurgery skills, but he also obtained a lot of shares in the surgical hospital where he worked. He became a young and rich surgeon and shareholder. Strange no longer cared about the cost of medical treatment. He only cared about whether the next patient he dealt with had a difficult surgical disease that other doctors could not solve. Then, he relied on his extraordinary neurosurgery skills to challenge the patient. This morning, Strange drove one of his favorite cars, the Chevrolet A8, through the main road of traffic, to the private surgical hospital in the center of New York to prepare for his daily work as a surgeon. But just as he arrived at the main entrance of the surgical hospital, Strange unexpectedly found that the entrance of the hospital was crowded with media personnel. Many local police came to maintain order at the scene with the hospital's guards and stopped the media reporters who wanted to enter the hospital building. Except for the patients in the hospital, related family members, and the hospital nurses, no one else is allowed to enter the hospital building. The captain of the guards wiped the sweat on his face and warned the crowd with a loudspeaker in his hand. The group of media personnel was stunned for a moment, then they shouted even louder. "I'm a patient. Let me in. I'm sick. I'm sick too." Strange squeezed through the crowd. The captain of the guards recognized him and hurriedly pulled Strange out of the crowd. "Captain Philip, what's going on with these media?" Strange asked in confusion. "Dr. Strange, you'll know when you go in." The captain of the guards smiled bitterly at Strange and then continued to try his best to stop the media reporters, so that they would not disturb the patients who were recuperating. Strange could only enter the hospital building with a heart full of doubts. When he arrived at the reception hall on the first floor, his female colleague, Dr. Christine Palmer, quickly stepped forward and dragged him by the arm to the elevator. "Come with me quickly. The director and chairman are all waiting for you." Strange could not help but ask, "Dr. Frisson, what happened in the hospital? Could it be a serious medical problem? It's not like you to be so anxious. Our hospital has been acquired. How can I not be anxious?" Kristen said angrily. "What did you say?" Strange was stunned. In the staff elevator that went up to the high-level meeting hall, Strange's face tightened. He thought calmly and muttered, "That's not right. Even if the hospital is acquired, according to the treaty, they should first hold a shareholders' meeting and vote on it gradually. After all, this is a big deal." Christine shrugged and said, because of the identity of the acquirer and the price offered, the major shareholder had no reason to refuse, so he agreed on his own initiative. Now, the acquirer, the director, and the shareholders are signing the contract in the meeting room. The director asked me to wait for you downstairs. When you arrive, I'll bring you directly to the meeting hall. No matter what, our hospital is one of the top 3 in New York City, and it's the only private surgical hospital. How could they be so careless? Who exactly are they? Strange could not think of a complete answer no matter how calmly he thought about it. "You just said that I'm not calm enough. You'll know when you get to the meeting hall." Kristen kept him in suspense and sighed softly. "If I were to describe it, they are, the ceiling." Ceiling? What kind of description was that? Strange's pride as a genius made him want to compete with them. When Kristen brought Strange to the corridor of the conference room, the door of the conference room suddenly opened. The old director of the hospital walked in at the front, and there were more than 10 shareholders and directors. Everyone was bowing politely, and they surrounded a man and a woman as they walked out. "Kristen, the other party you're talking about, could it be?" Strange stopped in his tracks and opened his mouth wide. Even without the crowd, the man and woman were still eye-catching. The man was young and handsome, and the woman was elegant and beautiful. When the two of them walked together, no one could take their eyes off them. Cale Carl, the symbol of peace, and Yutong Carl, the chairman of the unnatural law firm. Wasn't this the ceiling? The ceiling that represented all industries, achievements, money, and power. The hospital director obviously saw Strange. He quickly walked forward and whispered to him, "Strange, you're too late. The contract has been signed. You can sign it later." Without waiting for Strange's response, the old director pulled Strange and turned to Cale and Yutong. He introduced, "Mr. Cale, Miss Yutong, this is our hospital's most outstanding neurosurgeon, Stephen Strange." He's also one of the shareholders of the hospital. Oh? Kale smiled faintly. He was wearing a short-sleeved t-shirt and three-quarter casual pants. His tall and muscular perfect physique and gentle and calm domineering temperament made the shareholders with beer bellies beside him consciously keep a certain distance. One had to know. Kale, the symbol of peace, was the devil's killing god in World War II. Now, his status was ridiculously high. No matter how easygoing he appeared, no one dared to be really easygoing with him. However, to everyone's surprise, Kale suddenly stepped forward and took the initiative to reach out his left hand to Strange. Dr. Strange, right? Hello. Not only were the others stunned, Strange was also stunned. Fortunately, Kristen gave him a push. Strange was flattered and reached out to shake Kale's hand. In front of the living legend of New York, genius and conceit were all gone. Because the other party was the best genius. Strange, you're a surgeon. Kale looked at Strange calmly and did not let go immediately. Instead, he asked softly, then do you believe in ghosts and magic, or the theory of the soul? Strange did not expect the symbol of peace to take the initiative to shake hands, and even more did not expect him to suddenly ask such a question. Strange could not help but be silent for a moment. Finally, he made up his mind, took a deep breath, and shook his head. I'm a materialist. I only believe in science and knowledge. How can the so-called magic and the theory of the soul save those seriously ill patients? Strange. The old director was anxious, afraid that Strange would accidentally contradict Kale. Kale did not have any dissatisfaction. The corners of his mouth rose slightly, and he patted Strange's shoulder. He smiled and said, isn't excessive belief in science also superstition? Dr. Strange, I hope the next time we meet, you can still give the same answer. After saying this. Chapter 467. 3 days later. It had been 3 days since the unnatural law firm acquired the New York Surgical Hospital. This business news had been reported throughout the New York news media and no one was curious about it anymore. Strange, on the other hand, had been out of sorts for the past 2 days after seeing Kale. Even in his sleep, he was still thinking about the meaning of Kale's question. Fortunately, Strange was a strong-willed person. He quickly threw himself back into work and even arranged for himself to drive out to attend a banquet for the upper class on the weekend night. He planned to completely forget about those messy things. Sunday, 7:00 in the evening. On the other side. Strange had just driven his Lamborghini out of the luxurious rented room of the 5-star hotel and was heading to the banquet venue in Manhattan. On the other side. Kale, who was vacationing on a sunny island in the Atlantic Ocean, received a message from Yutong. Boss, he's already driving to the banquet venue we arranged. Very good. Kyle took off his sunglasses and got up from the sun chair. He straightened his back and stretched his body. His bones crackled. Yutong, who was dressed in her usual secretary attire, stepped forward and draped a casual shirt over his bare upper body. Let's go back to New York first. Vice, turn off the internal and external simulators and the artificial sun. Kale took Yutong away from the scenic beach and returned to the interior of an island with a jungle landscape. Understood, master. As Vice's voice abruptly sounded, the forest on the island twisted and transformed. The trees reverted to artistic sculptures, the soil reverted to vibranium flooring, and the mountains reverted to an extremely spectacular fortress building. This was Family Cal's headquarters, Dragon Turtle Island, a mobile fortress. At the same time, the sunlight that provided illumination dimmed. It turned out that the artificial sun in the sky had been extinguished. Above the dark clouds in the sky, a giant helicopter aircraft carrier was revealed. The large shadow cast by the aircraft just happened to cover the Dragon Turtle Island at the bottom. Kale and Yutong entered the fortress base. After passing through a fixed portal, they returned to the basement of the unnatural law firm in the next moment. "Boss, what should we do now?" Yutong looked at Kale in puzzlement. She did not know why her boss cared so much about a normal surgeon and even made meticulous arrangements and plans. Kale looked at the rows of luxury car parking lots in the basement and pondered. Let's pick a car first and wait on the way back to Strange Club. Kale thought for a moment and asked, "Are the banquet venue and his colleagues ready?" "According to your request, the banquet at the upper level was organized by a certain K2. He even invited many people from the upper class. It could be considered as a real show. I've also collected a few medical application forms for patients with severe neurological damage. As long as I send them to my strange colleague urgently through the internal system of the surgical hospital, my colleague will immediately call him to inform him." With a smile on her face, Yutong added, "There's no trace of deliberate artificiality. Everything is natural and real. Then what are we waiting for? Let's go." Kale snapped his fingers and picked a silver Ferrari sports car. He went to the driver's seat, and Yutong followed him and sat in the passenger's seat. Around 10:00 in the evening, on the highway along the lake and the mountain, two beams of light shone brightly. The engine was running at full speed. A white Lamborghini was driving at high speed on the highway. It was Dr. Strange Club, who was returning home after attending the banquet. No one noticed it. On the mountain peak surrounded by the highway, Kale and Yutong were standing on it. They looked down as if they were looking at Strange Club in the driver's seat through the body of the Lamborghini. Yutong's black hair fluttered slightly in the evening wind. She looked at the Lamborghini below and said softly, "Even if he's not at work, he's very principled. He only drank a little at the banquet. But that doesn't affect his driving, and it doesn't meet the criteria of being suspected of drunk driving. Since the main character is here, let's invite the actors to enter." Kale smiled faintly and said in a deep voice, "Vice, it's your turn." "Okay." Not long after Weiss responded, a silver Ferrari suddenly caught up with Strange's Lamborghini on the lakeside highway below. The silver Ferrari was about 20 meters behind the Lamborghini, closely following behind the Lamborghini. "Yutong, it's your turn." Kale's gaze turned to Yutong beside him. Yutong took out her phone and dialed a number. She gave a few instructions on the phone and then nodded at Kale. "It's been arranged." "Good. Next, a good show is about to begin." Kale clasped his hands together and smiled. He looked down at the two sports cars on the highway. In the driver's seat of the Lamborghini supercar, Strange did not notice the deep malice directed at him. He continued driving at the same speed. When he saw that the Ferrari had no intention of overtaking him in the rearview mirror, he did not pay much attention to it. At this moment, the phone that was connected to the sports car's built-in system suddenly rang. Strange glanced at the screen on the right. When he saw that it was his colleague who was also his assistant, he suddenly realized that it was Sunday night. He also had to arrange the work for tomorrow's surgery. Although he knew that it was inconvenient to make a phone call while driving, Strange's arrogance and conceit still made him answer his colleague's call while driving the sports car. "Mark, did the hospital receive a new application for treatment of a critically ill patient?" "Yes, there are 3. I'll let you pick first. Send the information to me directly. I'm driving. Also, tell me the general condition of each of them. I'll make it clear first. I won't accept if it's not difficult." "Okay. One of them has a brain tumor. Other doctors can do this too. Next." Strange and Mark chatted happily. When they talked about the critically ill patients that they were interested in, Strange even freed one of his hands to swipe the built-in touch screen in the sports car to look at the patient's X-ray. Weiss undoubtedly took advantage of this gap perfectly. He drove the Ferrari forward abruptly like a runaway wild horse. First, he caught up with Strange's Lamborghini and slightly overtook it. The two cars crashed into each other at high speed. Strange only felt the car's rear being hit. The car shook violently. Then, the whole car flipped 360 degrees and crashed through the high-speed fence along the lake. The front of the car fell into the dark shallow lake below. He went into shock and fainted in mid-air. The silver Ferrari was only damaged at the rear. It had no intention of stopping. It accelerated and disappeared at the end of the winding mountain highway. On the top of the highway, Yutong's eyes shone with a sacred silver light. Her long black hair fluttered in the absence of wind. Her body was suspended in mid-air. Her hands were still in the air. After everything was done, Yutong's feet landed on the ground. The silver light in her beautiful eyes faded. Her beautiful face was indifferent. "Boss, it's a success. According to your request, I appropriately protected his vulnerable parts. But his hands are basically useless. No matter how good the neurosurgery skills are, they can't be cured." Vice also reported, "Master, I've changed the camera footage. I've modified the CCTV records of this section of the road. The car will be scrapped. Everyone will just think that this is an ordinary car accident." "Well done." Kale looked at the stranded Lamborghini in the lake. He waved his hand and said, "The show is over. Let's call it a day and go home." Half an hour later. Chapter 468. New York Surgical Hospital, Single Intensive Care Unit. Strange did not know how long he had been unconscious. He only felt like he had a very, very long dream. It was only in the end that he started to regain his consciousness. He forced his eyes open a slit, and all he saw was white. There were all kinds of medical equipment, and there was an electrocardiogram beside him. It was the intensive care unit of the hospital he was most familiar with. The only difference was that he was the patient lying on the bed this time. Strange felt pain all over his body, but he could not feel anything in his hands, let alone pain. "Strange, it's all right, it's all right." A gentle and familiar voice sounded in his ears. Strange looked away and saw his female colleague, Kristen, squatting beside the bed. She looked at him with concern and said, "Everything will be fine." "What happened to me?" Strange asked with difficulty. He looked at his hands, which were fixed by all kinds of steel wires and equipment, and said in horror, "What did they do to me?" Kristen answered with pity, "You were in a car accident. The car fell into the lake, and the paramedics took a long time to find you. When they sent you to the hospital, it was already past the best time for neurological treatment." She paused and sighed. "You have torn ligaments in your hands, 12 steel nails in your bones, and your nerves are seriously damaged. No one can do better." "No." Strange looked at his hands that were almost crippled. The last bit of arrogance that came from a genius forced him to spit out a sentence with difficulty. I can do better." The office on the top floor of the unnatural firm building. Kale sat on the chairman's chair with his legs crossed. He swirled the red wine in his glass and took a sip. He looked down at the bustling streets of New York through the floor-to-ceiling window and said leisurely, "The weather is really good today. I can accompany you to get some sun." Lucy walked into the hall in her high heels. She was wearing a woman's suit, and her blonde hair was tied into a ponytail. She was less innocent and naive, but more mature. "Yutong has told me many times how busy you are." Kale shrugged uninterestedly. He put down the wine glass and pulled Lucy into his arms. His big hands gently pinched her bouncy round buttocks. Lucy didn't resist. She stuck out her tongue and said softly, "There's nothing we can do about it. We've been away from Earth for decades, and there have been many changes in our financial work. It will take some time to adapt to it. We also have to hand over the handover with Tony Stark Industries." "All right." Kale nodded. He seemed to be thinking about something absent-mindedly. Lucy obviously saw through it. She sat on Kale's stomach and said with a smile, Yutong also told me that you've been paying attention to a surgeon named Strange recently. You even plotted against him. I heard that he's been selling cars and houses recently, and he's been looking for a way to cure his paralyzed hands. He's now at the end of his rope. Even though she knew that Kale was doing something shady, Lucy and Yutong were the same. Not only were they disgusted by it, but they would also help Kale without hesitation. This was because the two women believed from the bottom of their hearts that Kale was doing the right thing. If the whole world thought that Kale was wrong, then the whole world was wrong. That's the effect I want. Kale smiled faintly and said, if he's not at the end of his rope, how can someone as arrogant as him give up everything he has and pursue a path that ordinary people don't dare to set foot on? What if that doctor finds out about this in the future? Will he blame you? Lucy only cared about Kale. Maybe, but I don't care. Kale's face was calm and natural. With his status and strength, he didn't need to think too much. As long as he wanted to do it, he would do it. Okay, I have to go to work. I'll accompany you tonight. Her finger moved teasingly on her left chest. Lucy gave Kale a flirtatious wink, and then she left the office on the top floor. This little vixen, Kale shook his head and muttered. After a while, Yutong came back to the office with a stack of documents in her hands. Boss. I sent K2 to conduct an extensive investigation of the paralyzed patients in New York City. In the end, we found someone who is suspected to be the type you mentioned. Yutong took out one of the documents and placed it on the table. She flipped the paper with her mind and it was the detailed information of a white young man. Kale looked and said, "Where's the doctor who diagnosed him?" Yutong was prepared. She took out another document. It was the information of a black doctor. He's still in New York. He's working as a neurological consultant in a public hospital. Kale finished the red wine in his glass. He smiled and ordered, "Now arrange for Strange to get in touch with that doctor. What happens next depends on his luck." Understood. Yutong nodded seriously. A few more days passed. Strange's hair was messy, his face was full of whiskers. He sat on the sofa of his own hotel. This was his last night in a 5-star hotel. He couldn't pay the rent tomorrow and had to move out. Not only that. The high cost of 6 or 7 cutting-edge surgeries almost exhausted the wealth he had accumulated in the first half of his life. Half an hour ago, Strange had a big fight with Kristen because Kristen kept persuading him to give up on his paralyzed hands and get back on his feet to face the current situation of life. Kristen might be right, but how could he get back on his feet after losing the hands he was so proud of? He went to the bathroom and stared blankly at himself in the mirror. He couldn't even hold the razor properly. Strange felt extremely hopeless. Just then, his phone rang. Strange used his scarred left hand to swipe the screen. After the call connected, his former colleague Mark's voice came through. "Strange, you haven't given up, right? I heard that there's a neurologist in New York who specializes in neurological consultation. Maybe he can help you." Strange took a deep breath and said, "Send me the location and contact information." Half an hour later. In the neurological consultation room of the New York Public Hospital. The black doctor sat face to face with Strange. He said bluntly, "I'm sorry, Strange. With our current neurological treatment technology, there's no way to cure your hands." Strange wasn't surprised at all. He smiled bitterly, raised his hands, and muttered to himself, "I knew it, I knew it. Have you seen anyone who can recover after being paralyzed like this? Even I can't do it, let alone others." A glimmer of light flashed in the black doctor's eyes. "Strange," he said, "there really is one." "What do you mean?" Strange looked at the doctor in surprise. The black doctor recalled and said, "There was a patient who was in a work accident. His back was injured and his whole body was paralyzed. One of his legs was completely disabled. He was in pain all over when he sat in a chair. Half a year ago, he gave up on treatment in our hospital. I haven't seen him since then and thought he was dead. And then? Strange asked eagerly. The Black Doctor sighed. Some time ago, I suddenly saw him. He walked past me like a normal person. How is that possible? Strange's eyes widened as if he was grasping at a life-saving straw. Please, give me his information. The Black Doctor looked straight at Strange and said in a low voice, You know that it's forbidden to retrieve a patient's information in the hospital. But to make a proud genius like you admit your mistake, I'm willing to make an exception this time. Chapter 469. Hospital Examination Report. Patient, Jonathan Panbone. Date of examination, December 3, 2011. Time of examination, 09:52, cause of illness, work-related accident, high degree of paralysis, crippled left leg, dislocated bone, relinquished treatment on January 22, 2012. Strange spent the entire night in the hotel reading the examination report of Jonathan Panbone in detail. No matter how he hypothesized and deduced, he admitted that there was no way he could use neurosurgery to treat Jonathan Panbone's illness. After all, Jonathan's paralysis was several times more severe than his own. If such a patient could really recover, it could only be described as a miracle. Since his body can recover, then maybe my hands can be saved. Strange's breathing quickened slightly. His eyes were filled with hope and anticipation. The next morning, Strange went to a basketball court next to a factory and found the severely paralyzed patient on the examination report, Jonathan. He was playing basketball with a group of colleagues. On the basketball court, Jonathan's legs were as if they were flying. There was no trace of the severely paralyzed patient from 1 or 2 years ago. He really recovered. Miracles really do exist. Strange stood outside the basketball court's iron fence and asked a passing colleague to call Jonathan over. Jonathan heard that someone was looking for him and came to the basketball court with a puzzled expression. When he saw Strange, who had experienced the vicissitudes of life, he could not help but raise his eyebrows. It's you, the famous neurosurgeon in New York. Why, are you looking for me? You know me? Strange was slightly puzzled. Jonathan said with a slightly mocking tone, Yes, 2 years ago. But my family couldn't even get into your office. They couldn't even get past your assistant. That's because I can't treat you. Strange did not mind. He looked at Jonathan and said in a low voice, Jonathan Panbone. 2 years ago, due to a work-related accident, both your spinal cords were completely damaged. Your chest was completely paralyzed, and so were your hands. Your left leg was also severely crippled. What do you want? Jonathan turned around uneasily, looked at his coworkers on the basketball court, and then glared at Strange. He did not want others to know about his special past. Strange raised his bandaged hands and looked directly at Jonathan. He said sincerely, You created a miracle out of despair. Now, I am also trying to find my miracle. Jonathan's heart trembled slightly. He had to admit that he saw a trace of himself in Strange. It was the kind of life where one was in a dark and hopeless situation but was still seeking light and hope. All right. Jonathan put down his grudge, walked a few steps forward, and asked Strange, Do you believe in magic? Spell? Strange muttered to himself. He remembered that some time ago, a man had asked him a similar question. Without waiting for his response, Jonathan continued, At that time, I already wanted to give up, but I thought that only my brain was functioning normally, so I wanted to train. I studied with a group of mages and saintesses. I sat on a chair and was carried by a group of strangers to meet the saint. Strange became more and more confused as he listened, but he still tried hard to remember everything Jonathan said. In the end, I found my mentor. I also entered a new realm here, and my soul was sublimated. Jonathan pointed to his forehead and said emotionally, "Then, I don't know how." Strange continued his unfinished words and said in disbelief, "Your body recovered?" "Yes." Jonathan nodded. "There are many mysteries behind it, but my body has recovered, and I don't have enough energy to stay and continue learning. Since the miracle has happened, I decided to go home obediently." Strange said eagerly, "Where is that place, please, tell me." Jonathan hesitated and replied, "The place you are looking for is called Kamartaj." With that, Jonathan turned and returned to the basketball court. "How much does it cost to get there?" Strange looked at his back and called out. Jonathan took a few steps toward the basketball court and finally turned back and said, "It's not a matter of how much it costs to get there, that's all. Good luck." Strange was in a daze. He looked down at his hands and kept muttering, "Kamartaj, Kamartaj, unnatural firm, top floor office." Yutong reported softly to Kale, who was sitting in the office chair, "Boss." Strange used up the last of his savings to buy a ticket to Nepal. Today, he is going to look for the mysterious place called Kamartaj. Kale, who was resting with his eyes closed, opened his eyes and smiled. "Yes, it depends on his luck. That place is not a place that ordinary people can find. Even if I go there specifically, I will probably be rejected. But if it's him, it should be no problem." "You think so highly of that doctor?" Yutong asked in surprise. Kale smiled faintly and said inexplicably, "Yes. I even suspect that that person deliberately waited for Strange to live until the present era by force. Since we are impatient with each other, let him take that step earlier." Kale looked out of the floor-to-ceiling window. His meaningful gaze seemed to penetrate through space and met with someone on the other side of the earth. "What you don't want to do, I've done it for you. Now it's up to you, Alpha Centauri." Nepal, in a church covered by magic. A bald woman was sitting cross-legged on a cushion. She slowly opened her eyes. Her eyes were as calm as an ancient well. It was as if stars had fallen from the sky. "Ancient One, what did you see?" Modu, who was wearing a dark mage robe, had been standing by the side. When he saw the woman open her eyes, he couldn't help but ask respectfully. Alpha Centauri frowned slightly and said, "There is a man suitable for cultivation. He came to Nepal and is still looking for Kamartaj." Modu asked in surprise, "Isn't this a good thing?" Alpha Centauri said calmly, "A good thing is a good thing. The problem is that the man came 4 years early. He should have come to us 4 years later." "4 years early? How could this be?" Modu was surprised. Alpha Centauri stood up and said with his hands behind his back, "A powerful existence forcibly interfered with his life and made him come here 4 years early." Modu pondered for a moment and asked, "In that case, should we accept that man? Or let him come back 4 years later?" "Come back 4 years later?" Alpha Centauri paced back and forth in the hall. This was the first time Modu saw the Sorcerer Supreme in such a difficult decision. "Forget it." Alpha Centauri finally sighed and ordered Modu, "Modu, go out and bring that man here." "Yes." Chapter 470. Unnatural Firm, Top Floor Office. Kale had just finished lunch with Lucy when Yutong came to his side and reported to him, "Boss. Strange was taken away by a black man in a cloak and a mask in an alley in Kathmandu, Nepal. Both Ketu lost track of him at the same time. Now we still don't know where Strange went. It's as if he disappeared from Kathmandu. It seems that Alpha Centauri has accepted him into the real Kamartaj." The corners of Kale's mouth rose slightly. Kamartaj was the mage headquarters hidden in the dimensional slit. If the owner, Ancient One, didn't want outsiders to enter, I'm afraid that even if they searched the whole Nepal, they wouldn't be able to find a way to enter Kamartaj. It didn't matter how much money they had on them. Only the fated people who were suitable to practice magic could reach the real Kamartaj. Then what else do we have to do? Yutong asked softly. No need, withdraw all the K2. Since the other side has accepted Strange, my purpose has been achieved. Kale touched his chin, and his golden pupils showed a thoughtful look. The current Doctor Strange in time and space may be born a few years earlier than the original history. By the way, Kale seemed to think of something and asked Yutong, how is Tawny? Did he send someone to contact Peter Parker? Yutong nodded gently and said with a smile, a few months ago, when I conveyed the boy's information file and your words to Tawny, he was a little impatient and said that he wasn't interested in children. As a result, last week, the boy had just graduated from junior high school, and Tawny personally drove to pick him up. I heard that today, he specially took him to visit the Stark Industries building. Is this the so-called law of fragrance? Kale smiled and didn't say anything. Ironworm was a CP. He didn't believe that Tawny wasn't interested in Peter's talent and potential. After all, if anyone can replace Iron Man in the future, perhaps that little spider is more suitable. Kale pondered for a moment before he suddenly had an idea. I haven't seen Tawny for a long time. Since we're free now, let's make a trip to the headquarters of Stark Industries. Okay, I'll arrange it right away. Yutong nodded. Downtown New York, Stark Industries' new headquarters. Half a year ago, it was the center of New York's home court. During the battle in New York, both sides had intentionally avoided buildings. As a result, the new headquarters building was the only intact ultramodern building among the ruins. At this moment, Tawny was leading a 14-year-old curly-haired boy around the laboratory of the Stark building. The curly-haired boy was like a country bumpkin who had just entered the city. His mouth was wide open the entire time. He looked left and right and marveled at the various new and high-end technological equipment. Actually, there's nothing much to see here. Tony followed behind the boy and yawned slightly. He was wearing a dark-colored t-shirt and a pair of casual long trousers. His entire person looked casual and lazy. Obviously, in the past 2 or 3 months, Tawny, like Kale, had a good rest for a period of time. Mr. Stark, what are you talking about? These are obviously great and very cool. The curly-haired boy looked at the hovering car parked in front of him and said exaggeratedly. That's because you haven't seen anything cooler. Tawny responded angrily. For people who have been out of the Earth and have seen the beauty of the technology of alien civilizations, they can understand the current technological level of the Earth more. Mr. Stark, can I try to drive it? The curly-haired boy put his palm against the smooth body of the car. His eyes were full of eagerness and he almost dripped saliva on the hovering car. Tawny put his hands in his trouser pockets and said casually, that's just a concept hovering car. It can't be completely on the road. When you get your driver's license, I can give you another one. Really? The curly-haired boy jumped up excitedly. However, when he thought of his age, his expression turned gloomy and he said dejectedly, I'm only 14 years old. I still need a few more years to get my driver's license. Is that so? That's for the best. Otherwise, you'll ruin the name of the Stark hovering car. That's a product invented by my father. Tawny laughed. The curly-haired boy quickly walked out of his pessimism and rushed to another product. When he got close to the workbench, he was suddenly stunned. On the large workbench, there was a humanoid body made of steel lying on it. It was silver in color and had a faint metallic luster under the light. Ah, that's a semi-finished product. I made it out of boredom these past few months. Tawny looked at the humanoid mechanical body on the workbench and explained, I thought that since there are mechanical alien races, then there's no doubt that artificial intelligence can be treated as a soul. What they lack is a body that can move freely. Mr. Stark, you're amazing. The curly-haired boy's small eyes seemed to be shining like stars. He threw out a series of questions in a very fast tone. Then what fuel does it use? Does it carry energy weapons with it? Can you be my friend? Don't you think you're asking too many questions? The corner of Tawny's mouth twitched slightly. At this moment, the phone in his trouser pocket rang. Tawny took out his phone and saw that it was little Pepperboss calling. Ignoring the boy who was clicking his tongue in wonder, he picked up the phone and teased, "What's wrong? I haven't seen you for 10 minutes. Do you miss me?" Boz snorted on the other end of the phone. "Miss you my ass. Your godfather is coming." "Godfather? Where is he?" Tawny was deeply surprised. After listening to Boz's words, he quickly nodded and said, "Got it. I'll go down now." He hung up the phone. Tawny put down the phone and looked back. He saw that the curly-haired boy was staring straight at him. He swallowed his saliva and said, "Mr. Stark, isn't your godfather?" Tawny said bluntly, "Yes, he's the one in your mind. He's here and wants to see you." "That old man wants to see me?" The curly-haired boy's voice was trembling and his words were not smooth. He originally thought that it was the luckiest thing in life that Mr. Stark had taken a fancy to him. He did not expect that there would be something more fortunate than this. "Don't call him old in front of Godfather. He looks younger than me." Tawny patted the boy's shoulder and reminded him. Then he took him out of the laboratory and went downstairs. In the reception hall of the headquarters building. When Tawny and the curly-haired boy entered the hall, Kale was already waiting on the sofa. Yutong and Boz, who were dressed similarly, were sitting and chatting. "Godfather, sorry to keep you waiting." Tawny greeted Kale. Kale saw Tawny enter and nodded lightly. "Where's your father? How has he been?" "He hasn't come to the family Cal to visit. He's at home. He said that he wants to have a good rest." Tawny quickly finished and pulled out the curly-haired boy behind him. He introduced him. "Peter Parker, a junior high school student from Queens." "Mr. Stark, I've graduated. I'm about to enter high school." Peter corrected him. He looked at Kale on the sofa with an extremely nervous expression and stuttered slightly. Hello, Mr. Kale." "Hello, Peter." Kale looked at the young curly-haired boy in front of him and could not help but smile. No one knew how much pressure the boy would have to bear in the future. After all, the greater the power, the greater the responsibility. Chapter 471. In the reception hall. Kale, who was sitting on the sofa, looked at Peter Parker, who was sitting next to Tawny. The boy was not the tall type, and he was a head shorter than Tawny. His facial features were delicate, and his tender face was full of shyness. He was no different from an ordinary junior high school student who had just graduated. However, his small arms were slightly bulging under his clothes, and there were invisible muscles that were hard to detect. He might contain a strength that could not be ignored. In short, he was a very down-to-earth boy next door. When Kale was looking at Peter, Peter was also looking at Kale with his small eyes excitedly. The young and handsome man in front of him was undoubtedly the legend of New York City. He was the symbol of peace that ended the disputes of World War II. He was like a character who walked out of a history book. His golden eyes carried a pressure that others could not easily look directly at. Although he was wearing an approachable casual outfit, there was still a unique domineering aura lingering around him. People could not help but fear and look up to him from the bottom of their hearts. God. The legendary hero, Mr. Kale, was sitting not far away from him, and he even greeted him. Peter's body was trembling with excitement. He wished he could bring his camera equipment and record this historic scene. He also wanted to add his own unique commentary to the whole process so that he could boast about it to his aunt and classmates in the future. "Okay. You are not even this excited to see me." Tawny patted Peter's shoulder. Peter took a slight breath and swallowed his saliva. He wanted to calm down, but his mouth was dry and his heart could not calm down. Kale thought for a moment, and with a smile on his face, he suggested to Peter, why don't we change the way we get to know each other? Mr. Kale, please go ahead. Peter took a deep breath, and there was a trace of surprise and expectation in his eyes. Tawny also looked at Kale in confusion. He did not know what Godfather wanted to do. A meaningful smile appeared on Kyle's face, and he said softly, the simplest and most brutal way. Stark Industries Building, Skydeck. Dressed in casual clothes, Kale stood on one side with his hands in his pockets, while Peter stood 10 meters away on the other side. Tawny and Yutong watched from the side. Mr. Kale, do you really want to fight? Peter's excitement only increased. His chest was heaving up and down. He kept rubbing his fingers with an eager look. He wanted to know the gap between himself and the legendary hero. Child, use your full strength and all your abilities. Don't disappoint me. Kale smiled faintly and looked calmly at Peter. Yutong looked at the two people who were about to fight on the stage. Her beautiful face smiled brightly and she commented softly, it's rare. I haven't seen Boss fight in a long time. It's good to let him do some warm-up exercises. Tawny looked worried. He coughed and said to Kale, Godfather, this isn't very good, is it? He's still just a child. Peter was full of fighting spirit. He took out a strange mechanical watch from his pocket and wore it on his right wrist. He rubbed his palm and said, Mr. Stark, don't underestimate me. I'm not underestimating you. I've already overestimated you as much as possible. But you need to understand who your opponent is. Tawny laughed bitterly. In his eyes, Peter was just a newborn calf that wasn't afraid of a tiger. Didn't he know that he was facing Earth's strongest legendary hero? Captain America Steve had publicly stated many times that Kale was a man born purely for battle. Hulk Banner had even been beaten by Kale to the point of being autistic. He didn't dare to transform into Hulk for several months in New York. Those powerful alien enemies that were as strong as monsters. Luo Nan, Igua, and the like had dominated the starry skies for hundreds and thousands of years. But in the end, they still fell at Kale's hands. The more familiar he was with Kale, the more he knew how strong Kale was. Tawny, since you're so worried, why don't you and Peter fight together? Your mark armor should have some new improvements, right? Kale shot a glance at Tawny and said. Tawny heard this and hesitated for a moment. But he still walked towards Peter from the audience seats. Godfather, you said it. Mr. Stark, I can actually fight alongside you. Peter was even more excited. He hadn't stopped since just now. Be serious, child. Losing is certain, but don't lose too unsightly. Tawny came to Peter's side. He took off his glasses and ordered his smartwatch. Jarvis, bring me the latest mark armor. Yes, sir. Not long after Jarvis spoke, a dozen or so mechanical parts flew out from the laboratory downstairs. They all had braking engines and automatically flew towards Tawny on the rooftop. Peter jumped in fright and hurriedly stepped aside. Tawny's hands spread out at the same time. Those parts were completely compatible with his body. They quickly covered the surface of his body and soon pieced together into a golden battle armor. The metal chest and eye sockets flickered with a bright white light. Cool. Iron Man armor. Peter instantly turned into a super fanboy. He impatiently looked at Tawny, who was equipped with top-notch technological equipment. He then looked at the equipment on his wrist, which was seriously lacking in production funds. Tawny spread out his hands and said, Child, don't look at me like that. Be serious. I'll customize a battle armor for you based on your performance. Okay. Peter hurriedly nodded and focused on Kale again. He squatted down slightly with his left palm on the ground and assumed a battle-ready posture similar to that of a spider. Then I'll go. Kale looked at Tawny and Peter, who were the best prepared, and reminded them. Wait a minute. Tawny's hands, which were glowing with white light, paused and said seriously, "Godfather, I still have conditions." "Why are you more like a child than Peter?" Kale rolled his eyes and said angrily, "Say it, what conditions?" "That, in the battle later, you are not allowed to activate the double star form," Tawny said in a deep voice. "Okay." Kale agreed. This request was not excessive. If he activated the double star form, then he would be more excessive. In addition, the vice and venom on your body are not allowed to participate in the battle. Tawny continued. "Okay." Kale nodded. On second thought, vice countered the Iron Man armor, and venom countered the small spiders. If they participated in the battle, he might not even be able to warm up. And, while Tawny was still thinking, Kale took the initiative to weaken himself. He said indifferently, "How about this? I won't activate the double star form, won't release vice and venom, won't use the flames of the Protoss talent, won't use any weapons, and will only use 1/10 of my divine body strength. Is that okay?" 1/10 of Kale's divine body's strength was equivalent to Captain America's physique. It was not exaggerated, but it was already in a severely weakened state. What double star? Venom? Peter was confused. He only knew that before the battle started, Kale was constantly going easy on him. "Godfather, we have 2 people on our side. Aren't you being too careless?" Tawny's eyes lit up as he accumulated engine energy in his palm. He thought that this might be the only chance to beat Kale, so he couldn't wait and said, "Then let's start." Chapter 472. On the circular rooftop of the new building of Stark Industries. The strong wind at high altitude whistled past, blowing Kale's silver bangs. He looked at Tawny and Peter standing side by side 10 meters away, and the corners of his mouth rose slightly as he took the initiative to remind them, "Then, I'm coming," as soon as his voice fell. Kale's tall body flickered slightly, and with the lingering fog, he quickly disappeared in front of everyone's eyes. "Mr. Stark, where is he?" Peter looked confused, and his small head kept turning, scanning the empty rooftop area. "Don't panic, stay alert." Tony was also shocked. He should have known that the Godfather had other unknown abilities in the early days other than the twin star form and the God race flame that he often used. "Jarvis, start infrared scanning and help me find Godfather's current location," Tawny said while keeping his arm raised. His palm was filled with dazzling Krypton energy, ready to fight back at any time. "Okay, boss." Jarvis, the artificial intelligence carried with the armor, quickly used the Iron Man armor's built-in scanning device to scan the rooftop area. "The location of the target is now," before Jarvis gave an accurate location prompt. Peter, who had been on guard, suddenly trembled, and the hair on his arm stood up. The spider's senses gave an unprecedented danger signal. "Behind you. Mr. Stark, be careful." Peter almost relied on his superior reflexes to push Tawny in an emergency manner. As soon as he made this move, a black shadow emerged from the fog behind him, and his fist hit the air with wind pressure. "Not bad, kid." Kale, who was out of stealth, blinked in surprise and praised Peter. Peter's immature face was smiling. Kale raised his right foot at high speed and kicked Peter's small body out. "Unfortunately, you're still too young." "Godfather." Tawny raised his hands again and aimed at Kale. The moment he aimed at him, the energy beam shot out. Kale didn't retreat. He just tilted his body slightly from side to side, and the laser beam missed his face and shoulders. Tawny wanted to continue firing the light beam, but Kale didn't give him the chance at all. He approached him in a stride, and his left and right hand stretched out like lightning, firmly locking Tawny's steel-covered wrists. No matter how hard Tawny struggled, he couldn't change the fact that he wasn't good at close combat. Kale calmly looked at Tawny, and slowly pressed his hands down. He said indifferently, "I've always reminded you that using your hands to fire the light beam has a certain delay, and it completely exposes the trajectory of your beam. Yes, you did remind me. Tani gave up resisting and replied inexplicably. Then, a circular halo lit up on his chest. Kale's pupils contracted. He flipped his hands and flung Tani away. Tani was in the air, and a powerful laser beam shot out from his chest toward the sky. Not bad, but don't think about flying away to open up the distance. Kale rushed toward Tani, who had yet to regain his balance. However, an unknown white object suddenly stuck to the back of his calf and stuck to the floor, preventing him from attacking Tani. Annoying little spiders. Kale looked back. What stuck to his right foot was a white spider web. Peter exhaled softly and hurriedly got up from the ground. He cried out in pain, "Mr. Kale, are you sure you only used 1/10 of your strength? Don't doubt it, child. If Godfather had used his full strength, you might have turned into minced meat just now." As Tani spoke, he took the opportunity to activate the engines on his hands and feet to regain his balance in the air. "All right." Peter shrugged. He raised his right hand, and the watch on his wrist immediately shot out a white spider web. This time, the target wasn't Kale, but the wall behind him. The moment the spider web stuck to the wall, Peter pulled the tough spider web and swung it toward Kale, whose calf was bound by the spider web. "Child." When Tani, who was flying in the air, saw this, he couldn't help but slap his forehead. He could foresee what would happen next. After all, no matter what the situation was, choosing to fight Godfather in close combat was a very wrong decision. Peter swung toward Kale. Naturally, he had his own thoughts. Although he was only in his early 14 years old, after being bitten by a spider and his body mutated, his strength had increased to an exaggerated 3 tons. What was the concept of 3 tons of strength? It meant that he could lift a heavy truck. "Ha!" Peter roared. The 5 fingers of his right hand clenched into a fist and poured all the strength in his body. As his body fell, he threw a powerful punch toward Kale with inertia. This was a confident punch as Spider-Man. If this punch could shake the legendary hero, it meant that he wasn't far from the debut of a rookie hero. Peter carried this excited thought until his small fist was caught by Kale's palm. His fantasy was shattered. "Your strength is good, but you're too reckless. With your mutated ability, you're not suitable for a head-on confrontation." Kale grabbed Peter's fist with one hand and picked him up like a chicken. He kicked Peter again and sent him flying far away for the second time. It had to be said. Peter's strength was more than 10 times that of an ordinary person. Unfortunately, under the similar strength, Kale's close combat skills undoubtedly crushed it. "Godfather, don't underestimate me." Tani came to a height of 20 meters above Kale's head. He opened his left and right arms and opened a row of small holes from his steel arms. A total of 12 small missiles were fired at the same time, surrounding Kale in the center of the rooftop. Boom boom boom. For a moment, the blast from the missile explosion covered Kyle, and even the rooftop was shrouded in it. There's nowhere to hide from this move. It should be effective, right? Tony looked down at the bottom of the black smoke. At this moment, a black wave of air suddenly whizzed out, and a figure jumped out from it at an extremely fast speed. Air sprint. "Tani, you're not so naive as to think that I can't do anything to you if you hide in the air." Kale directly passed Tani's height with the blast of air. He crossed his fingers and put them together like a hammer, hammering Tani's head fiercely in the air. Clang, with the dull sound of iron striking, Tani fell to the rooftop. When he was about to hit the ground, a spider web caught him and cushioned the powerful impact of falling to the ground. "Mr. Stark, are you okay?" Peter covered his painful stomach with one hand and helped Tani, whose battle suit was slightly damaged, up with the other. "I'm okay, but something will happen soon." Tani looked up at Kale solemnly. "I hope his next kick will be gentle. I'm just a child." Peter's face was pale. He could barely stand the 2 kicks. "Who's not?" Tawny patted him on the shoulder comfortingly. "Get used to it." Chapter 473. Kale fell straight from a height of 20 meters. The moment his feet touched the ground, he squatted down slightly to dissipate the force. However, due to his weight being higher than that of ordinary people, he still cracked the solid floor of the rooftop. Gravel and dust surged to both sides. Peter's body began to tremble. 2 against 1. He clearly had the absolute advantage, but the man in front of him could not be described with common sense. After all, he was famous for fighting a country alone during World War II. This was a legend. "Mr. Stark, what should we do now?" Peter's voice was trembling and throbbing. The hairs on his hands were standing on end. The warning from spider sense had not stopped since the beginning. He had a deep understanding of the gap between them. It was not only physique and ability, but also combat experience, fighting skills, and so on. The 2 sides were not on the same level at all. That was true. How could a person in an era without the smoke of war talk about fighting with a person who had ended the World War? Kale's combat awareness and combat experience were all tempered by him from cruel wars. "Pa!" A steel palm slapped Peter's back, causing Peter to wake up from his self-doubt and confusion. Tawny said to Peter, "Peter, you said earlier that you wanted to be a superhero. You're not backing down at this level, are you?" I'm not." Peter took a deep breath, clenched his fists tightly, and refocused his eyes on Kale in front of him. "That's right." Tawny smiled and looked at Kale not far away. He sighed. "It's not just you. As long as any hero fights with Godfather, their self-esteem will be trampled and they will fall into a depression of self-doubt. The light emitted by Godfather as a hero is too dazzling. As long as we are compared to him, our own shining points will be overshadowed." Peter asked in surprise, "Mr. Stark, in the end, how did you get out?" "It's very simple. Don't forget about your own special talents and your shining points. Maintain sufficient confidence." Tawny spoke for a long time, and Peter listened attentively as if it was the Bible until Tawny finally concluded, "The most important thing is, don't compare yourself to Godfather. Just treat him as the only special case on Earth." "Peter," Tawny leaned closer to Peter and whispered, "Okay, kid. I think we should discuss our tactics and how to continue the battle." Kale looked at the 2 of them whispering to each other, but he didn't interrupt them. He stood in place and waited until Tawny and Peter stopped talking. Only then did he ask calmly, "Shall we continue?" "Continue." Tawny waved his hand slightly forward, sending out the attack signal. Peter immediately rushed towards Kale, while Tawny started the engine and flew into the sky. Another active attack? Or a close combat game? Kale's pupils reflected the approaching Peter. He didn't know whether to say that the other party was confident or stupid, but there was no reason for him to retreat in close combat. Hence, Kale also started sprinting and rushed towards Peter. He threw a straight punch at the other party's chest at the same time. Peter rolled its eyes and stretched out its hands, seemingly wanting to catch Kale's fist with its hands. However, it retracted its hands midway and somersaulted high above Kale's head. Huh! Kale's attack failed. He turned around and wanted to chase after the agile Peter. At this moment, the roar of an engine could be heard from the back of his head. Kale didn't even think about it. He turned around and threw a punch, which happened to collide with Tawny's iron fist that was powered by the engine. Sparks flew, and the airwaves and wind pressure spread slightly. "Tawny, you've also switched to close combat?" Kale looked at the shining iron mask nearby. Wrong answer. Tawny didn't tangle with Kale for too long. After attracting his attention, he quickly turned on the engine in his palm and quickly pulled away from Kale with the help of the engine. Kale became vigilant. He suddenly remembered that there were still small spiders behind him. By the time he reacted, 2 white sticky spiderwebs had shot at his feet and were stuck to the floor. "Mr. Kale, you're too careless." Peter was still not at ease. He used the spinneret in his right hand to continuously shoot out spiderwebs until Kale's feet were firmly stuck to the floor. Kale exerted force in his feet, but he found that with just 1/10 of his strength, he couldn't break free from the strong bindings of the multiple tough spiderwebs. He couldn't move at all. "Godfather, you won't be able to escape this time." Tawny's voice came from in front of him again. Kale looked up and saw that Tawny, who was 10 meters away, had raised his arms. As long as it could be fired, he activated all the guns on his shoulders, arms, wrists, and palms. Without exception, all of them were aimed at him. The game ends here. Whoosh whoosh whoosh, it was as if a military unit had opened fire at the same time. Countless small missiles and laser beams were fired at Kale. At the critical moment, Kale suddenly opened his hands to both sides. Under Tawny and Peter's shocked gaze, the numerous small missiles and laser beams were only 5 meters away from Kale. It was as if they had been hit by a mysterious force. They all deviated from their original trajectories and missed their targets. Boom! 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 The cannonballs exploded in the sky outside the rooftop like a gorgeous firework. Just now. What was that? Peter's mouth was wide open. His eyes were filled with shock and uncertainty. "Godfather, did you cheat?" Tawny asked unwillingly. Kale smiled but didn't say anything. Yu Tong, who was watching from the side, smiled brightly and explained, "Force field traction. It can control the force field to a certain extent. It's not an ability that boss often uses. It's normal that you don't know about it." "You're kidding, right?" Peter sat down on the rooftop with a frustrated face. Tawny couldn't take it anymore. He shouted, "Godfather, how many abilities do you have?" "I still have some, but I can't use some of them for now." Kale controlled the force field with both hands. He moved his body and pulled his feet out of the spiderwebs. The cooperation just now was pretty good. Peter was the main control, and Tawny, you were the main firepower. You could use your strengths at the same time. If the enemy wasn't me, they might have been killed. Kale looked at Tawny and then at Peter. "So, do you still want to continue?" "Mr. Kale, let me go. I'm still a child." Peter was so tired that he directly laid down on the rooftop. "Let me go too." Tawny raised his hands and made a gesture of surrender. "Okay." Kale felt that it was about time. At least he had warmed up his lower body. He first said to Peter, "Child, you need to learn your fighting skills well. If you have time, come to the SHELD headquarters more often and let Steve and Natasha teach you." Peter quickly nodded. He couldn't ask for more guidance from a hero. Kale looked at Tawny and said calmly, "As for you, Tawny, the firepower of the steel armor configuration isn't strong enough. If your firepower is strong enough in the end, I won't be able to deflect your attack at all." "I understand." Tawny nodded slightly. At this moment, he made a decision in his heart. Chapter 474. Tawny and Peter's first battle as a team ended in failure. There was nothing they could do about it. After all, they were fighting against Kale. With Kale's complete mastery of the double star form, not to mention the Earth, even in the entire Marvel Universe, there were only a few people who could be compared to him in the true sense. Although Kale only used 1/10 of his strength, his combat skills and other aspects were not so easy to make up for. Tawny took off his Iron Man armor, wiped the sweat on his forehead, and suggested, "Godfather, stay for dinner? I'll ask Little Pepper to make it for you." Speaking of Little Pepper, Kale's eyes fell on Tawny, and suddenly asked, "You two, haven't gotten married yet? Didn't you say before that you would get married after finding your father?" Yutong smiled. As a child, Peter put on an expression of ignorance and stood in place, not daring to make a sound. Tawny was completely stumped by the question and touched his nose awkwardly. Godfather had urged him to get married more than once or twice, and this time it was in the presence of Peter. He could only reply, "Didn't I just return to Earth? There are a lot of things to deal with at Stark Industries," and my father sighed. "I talked to Little Pepper, and we will definitely get married. We will try to get married in the next year or two." "That's good. But since you haven't gotten married yet, I won't eat your meal first. Invite me again when you get married." Kale waved goodbye and walked downstairs. Yutong stepped forward to keep up, and the two were about to leave the rooftop. "Godfather, you walk slowly." Tawny didn't urge him to stay. When Kale was about to walk down from the rooftop, he suddenly stopped. Yutong seemed to feel something and looked up at the sky. Her beautiful face became dignified at the same time. "Godfather, what's wrong?" Tawny could clearly tell that something was wrong with the two of them. Kale put his index finger on his lips, indicating for everyone to be quiet. Then, he asked in an unknown direction, "Heimdall? Tell me, why are you looking for me?" The voice of the gatekeeper of the divine realm, Heimdall, echoed out from the other side of the starry skies, whispering into Kale's ears. "Protector Kale, His Majesty wishes to invite you to see him." "Odin? You want to see me?" Kale was surprised. He thought for a moment and said, "When?" Heimdall quickly said, "Right now. Find an open space and I'll use the rainbow bridge to pull you over." "All right, I have nothing to do anyway." Kale casually shrugged. He turned his head and instructed Yutong, "You go back by yourself first. I have some matters to attend to in God's domain." "Boss, be careful." Yutong nodded. Kale exhaled and walked back to the open space on the rooftop. He looked up at the sky filled with dark clouds. As if responding to his summons, a dazzling beam of light descended from the sky and enveloped his tall body. In the blink of an eye, Kale disappeared from the rooftop of the Stark skyscraper, leaving behind only traces of burning ruins. Yutong and Tawny, who had seen this unique method of travel in God's domain, were still fine. However, little Spider Peter's mouth was already wide open. The upper limit of its knowledge was constantly being refreshed today. "Mr. Stark, Mr. Kale. Where did he go?" Peter, who was usually talkative, asked weakly with a slight stutter. "Where else can he go?" "He went up to the sky." Tawny kept looking at the sky and answered matter-of-factly. The rainbow bridge crossed the 9 worlds and the boundless starry sky. With a sense of dissonance, Kale came to the rainbow building, which was the gateway to God's domain. Heimdall, who was wearing golden armor and holding a silver longsword, greeted him with a slight bow. "Guardian, welcome. Her Majesty is already waiting for you in the main hall of the Immortal Palace." Kale looked around and saw that there was no one else at the door. He couldn't help but ask, "Where's Thor? As the Master, why didn't he come to pick me up this time?" Heimdall said, "The gathering of the 9 worlds is imminent. The disputes at the starry sky border are endless. Thor just went to support the Vanaheim star field. It seems that not only Earth, your side is also not having a good time." Kale shook his head gently and activated the double star form. Wrapped in dazzling light energy, his body left the ground and floated up. Then, he flew along the straight solid rainbow bridge toward the glittering golden Immortal Palace. In the main hall of the Immortal Palace. Having been here once before, Kale didn't need anyone to lead him. He came here with ease. As soon as he entered the empty and magnificent hall, he saw a lonely old king sitting on the throne. His blind right eye was wearing a protective plate, and his turbid left eye was watching his arrival. The king of the gods, the master of the 9 worlds, the master of the Immortal Palace, and Thor's father, Odin. Kale deactivated the double star form and landed lightly in the hall. He calmly raised his eyes and looked at Odin. The last time he saw Odin, Kale was still a newly ascended god. He had just obtained the divine power of the fire god. He was afraid of this king and couldn't help but feel a little scared. But this time, Kale had obtained a brand new power that transcended the god race and became a true star powerhouse. Now, even if he faced the king of the gods, Odin, he dared to be on equal footing. He wouldn't have the slightest scruple or fear. On the throne, Odin held the scepter in his hand and lowered his eyes. Sure enough. Kale, your strength is much stronger than the last time. After all, when I see a mountain in front of me, I will try my best to catch up and then constantly try to climb over it. Kale smiled faintly and looked at Odin. He said inexplicably, Your Majesty, I don't know if it's my illusion or if my strength has increased, but why do I feel that you are weaker than a few years ago? Fortunately, there was no one else in the main hall of the Immortal Palace. Otherwise, Kale's last sentence would have caused a sensation in the entire divine realm. His Majesty Odin is weak? Except for Kale, no one dared to say it in front of Odin. No matter how weak Odin was, a starving camel was still bigger than a horse. All living things in front of him were still ants that he could casually crush. Odin didn't care. He leaned back on the throne and said, I am old. Even a god will grow old one day. The god king who had shaken the 9 realms for millions of years was finally going to decline in his old age. Will I also have such a day? Kale didn't know what to feel. He took the initiative to say, Your Majesty asked me to come here. Do you have something to tell me? Otherwise, you wouldn't have summoned me when Thor wasn't here. Yes, 2 things. Odin nodded. The first thing is about Loki and Thor. As soon as Odin opened his mouth, Kale had already guessed it. No matter how powerful Odin was when he was young, he was still a white-haired father in his old age. Sure enough, the first thing he thought of was still his own child. Odin said softly, as if he was making a will, Loki invaded your home planet Earth. It was my fault for not teaching him well. As a father, I should apologize to you and the people of Earth. However, this has nothing to do with Thor. He is about to inherit my throne and become the new king of Asgard. When the time comes, I hope you can. Kale understood what he meant and said directly, I know. Thor is also my friend. After he becomes the God King, I will do my best to help him. Good, good, good. Odin said a few good words, his face full of relief. He seemed to be really tired and wanted to have a good rest. From this moment on. Chapter 475. Divine Realm, Hall of the Palace of Immortals. The splendid main hall made of gold was silent. Only Odin, who was sitting on the divine throne, and Kyle, who was sitting in the main hall, were looking at each other and talking. So, what is the second thing you are referring to? Kale pondered and asked. The second thing, Odin's expression was complicated as he recalled, this matter started 1,000 years ago. 1,000 years ago, the universe was in chaos. At that time, there was an evil race called the Dark Elves. In order to plunge our universe into endless darkness, they tried to control an ancient weapon that could destroy everything. Ancient weapon? What is that? Kale was immediately curious. Up until now, he had personally experienced Marvel's worldview. Those rumored weapons with great power were nothing more than artifacts passed down from ancient races, such as Thor's hammer, eternal fire, and so on. There was also the well-known Infinity Stone. As if to verify Kale's guess, Odin said slowly, that ancient weapon is called Ether Particle. Ether Particle? That's right. Kale's eyes flashed. Among the 6 Infinity Stones that contained the power of the universe, there was one that did not exist in the form of a gem. Ether Particle, also known as the Reality Gem. Legend had it that it had the power to turn all fantasies into reality and reality into nothingness. Odin recounted the mythical history of those years in an incomparably calm tone. Before the most brutal dark elf Mox used the ether particle, I led the divine realm's holy army to destroy its plan. It was a tragic battle where both sides suffered losses. In the end, the dark elf army was defeated and we won the ether particle with a Pyrrhic victory, protecting the light and peace of the 9 worlds. What about the ether particle? Kale grasped the key point. Odin raised his head slightly and muttered, I wanted to destroy the ether particle to prevent it from continuing to harm the universe. Unfortunately, the energy it contained was too strong, even I could not destroy it. So I can only bury the ether deep underground, hoping that it won't appear in the universe again. Kale's expression became increasingly confused. He looked at Odin and asked straightforwardly, since you don't wish for the ether particles to appear, then why are you bringing it up now and even telling it to me? The less people know about this, the better, right? That's right. However, nothing can go as I wish, even if I am a god king. Odin sighed and said, just a few days ago, I sensed a leak in the underground seal. The ether particles might reappear in the world. As for why I'm telling you this, it's because the place where the ether particles appear is most likely the Earth that you're on. Ether particles had appeared on Earth? Kale's mind trembled. His usually calm heart couldn't help but become excited at this moment. He already had 3 infinity stones in his hands. The more gems he had, the stronger his capital and foundation would be. If he could collect 6 infinity stones in advance, then why would he have to worry about Thanos, the purple potato spirit? Previously, Kale had been worried that other than the time stone in Alpha Centauri, there were no other clues about the remaining 2 gems. He didn't expect that the reality stone would appear on its own so soon, and even appear on Earth's home ground. I understand. Kale suddenly understood and looked at Odin. You want me to solve the problem of the ether particles? Odin nodded. Yes, you are the guardian of the realm of the gods, and also the guardian of Earth. You are the most suitable person to do this. That's not right. Kale narrowed his eyes, touched his chin, and questioned, there is someone who should be more suitable than me. Why don't you give priority to Thor? Odin was silent for a moment and explained, Thor is about to ascend the throne in the realm of the gods, so it's not suitable for him to go to Earth often. Moreover, Thor has the blood of the king of gods flowing in his body, and that mortal woman named Jane. The last sentence is the main reason why you don't let Thor go. Kale smiled indifferently, but he was not interested in the family affairs of the gods, nor did he want to interfere too much. He skipped the topic and said, leave the problem of the ether particles to me, but I have a condition. Stepping out of the hall of the immortal palace. The corners of Kale's mouth rose slightly. This time, coming to the immortal palace of the realm of the gods, not only did he get the whereabouts of the reality stone, but Odin also promised to let him choose the materials for forging artifacts, including the branches of the world tree and the Wuru metal. It could be said to be killing 2 birds with 1 stone. However, Odin also had a condition, and that was, he didn't want Thor to know about this. London, huh? Kale murmured softly, clenching his hands into fists. As the dazzling twin-star energy circulated, he turned into a stream of light and left the immortal palace, returning to the Rainbow Bridge building at the entrance to the realm of the gods. In less than a second, Kale crossed a few kilometers and came to the Rainbow Bridge that Heimdall was guarding. Heimdall stood on the central platform, holding the silver holy sword that was the key to the Rainbow Bridge. He opened his shining eyes and looked at Kale. Guardian. Send me back, Kale said quickly. Okay. Heimdall held the silver holy sword with both hands and inserted it into the groove of the Rainbow Bridge. When he was about to open the rainbow door to Earth, he suddenly frowned. Someone is coming back from the battlefield. In accordance with his words, Heimdall activated the Rainbow Bridge. Under the rotation of the rainbow light, a tall and burly figure suddenly appeared in the hall. Wild blonde hair and a beard, a rough and handsome face, wearing a majestic silver armor and a red cloak, and holding Thor's hammer that contained the power of thunder. The person who appeared in front of him was none other than Thor. Odin, I still can't get around him, Kale, who was in the same place, said helplessly to himself. When Thor, who returned to the realm of the gods, saw Kale, he was pleasantly surprised and quickly greeted him. He laughed and opened his hands. Kale. My friend, long time no see. Yes, I haven't seen you for a few years, and you've become stronger. Kale smiled back and responded with a bear hug. After exchanging greetings, Thor looked at Kale with a little doubt and said, You went back to Earth, right? Why did you have time to come to the realm of the gods? Why didn't you let Heimdall inform me? Before Kale could respond, Heimdall said, His Majesty specially summoned the guardian of the realm of the gods. Father? Thor raised his eyebrows and didn't think much about it. He naturally put his hand on Kale's shoulder and suggested, You came at the right time. Don't go back so quickly, and join the celebration banquet tonight. I'll invite you to taste the wine of our realm of the gods. Kale decisively refused. It's good, but there are some things at home that I need to go back to deal with. Next time, I'll come to the realm of the gods to find you when I'm free. Okay, then I'll keep the good wine for you. Thor said heartily. Okay. Kale was relieved when Heimdall on the high platform suddenly said, Thor, the human girl you asked me to take care of has disappeared from Earth. Thor's pupils shrank, and he removed his hand from Kale's shoulder and asked anxiously, Jane, what happened? Heimdall shook his head and said in a deep voice, I'm not sure. She was originally in London on Earth, but she suddenly left my line of sight. I see. Thor hesitated, but still made up his mind and said, Open the door, Heimdall, I want to go to London on Earth. Yes. Heimdall nodded and looked at Kale. Isn't the Guardian going back to Earth? Just in time. Yes, just in time. Kale smiled bitterly and didn't know what to say. Chapter 476. Kale looked at the anxious and determined Thor and knew that there was no way to dissuade him this time. Perhaps in the eyes of the current king of gods, Odin, Thor was the future king of Asgard. He was about to be in charge of supreme power and had a lifespan measured in tens of thousands of years. On the other hand, human women on Earth only had a lifespan of a mere 100 years. They were weak and powerless. Naturally, he was not optimistic about the love between Thor and Jane. But the high and mighty Odin would not know that humans could become gods, and gods would fall into the human world one day. This was fate and the universe. Nothing was immutable. Was he getting old? Or was he infected by the old man, Odin? He always felt that his thoughts were getting older and older. Kale looked absent-minded for a moment, then nodded to Heimdall and said, Open the Bifrost, I will go to London with Thor. Earth London, located in the downtown area, a large abandoned factory building. Police cars with flashing lights and long sirens emerged from all over the streets and stopped outside the factory building. Immediately afterward, police officers in police uniforms and armed with guns came out of the cars and surrounded the entrance. In the open space inside the factory building, a black van was parked. Jane's research assistant and good friend, Daisy, was recording research materials with a young man, the new assistant. Faced with the sudden intrusion of a group of armed policemen, Daisy and the young man were also shocked. The documents in their hands almost fell to the ground. Serious warning. You have illegally entered private property. Please take all your belongings and leave here immediately. Please do everything within 5 minutes, or we will take enforcement measures. The police captain in the lead held a loudspeaker and shouted at Daisy and the others in the factory building. The rest of the policemen were on standby solemnly and coldly. Daisy, what should we do now? The young man who was the new research assistant suddenly panicked and hurriedly looked at Daisy. What else can we do? Jane must still be in the house. Let's find Jane first. I won't leave until I find her. Daisy's cold face remained calm and her words were firm. Just as she was about to enter the building again to search, a figure suddenly staggered out of the factory. Daisy took a closer look and found that it was Jane who had disappeared inexplicably. Jane! Daisy threw the documents in her hand into the car in surprise. She rushed forward and supported Jane, whose face was slightly pale. Jane, I'm sorry. Where did you go just now? We've searched the entire factory building, but we couldn't find you. I don't know. That place is very strange. It's like a sealed underground. Jane shook her head, her beautiful eyes still hazy. Rumble, at this moment. Accompanied by the strong and dull sound of thunder, the sky that was originally covered with gray clouds suddenly started to rain heavily, drenching the surrounding police officers and the new young assistants. Only Jane and Daisy, who were standing in the middle of the open space, seemed to be protected by some kind of power. Even the rainwater formed by nature just happened to avoid them. What? What's going on? Daisy looked up at the sky and stretched out her palm in surprise. Not even a drop of rain fell on her body. Jane looked sideways as if she sensed something. She saw that a dozen meters away, Thor, who was wearing silver armor and holding a hammer, was standing there, looking at her affectionately and quietly. Thor. Jane whispered softly. Seeing her Protoss boyfriend who had been missing for several years, she walked over with anger and disbelief. As soon as Jane stepped forward to leave, the rain fell. Daisy was about to suffer, but as soon as the rain approached the top of her head, it naturally bounced to both sides, as if there was an invisible wall of air blocking the rain outside. Behind her, a very magnetic and steady male voice came. Miss Daisy, long time no see. Daisy's heart skipped a beat. She turned around and looked. Standing behind her was the silver-haired Kale, who was still as handsome as ever. It had been a few years. Time had not left a trace on Kale's face. He was still young and handsome, as if he had walked out of a portrait. Kale, Kale. Why are you here? Daisy covered her open mouth with both hands, and then hugged Kale's arm excitedly. She was about to faint from great happiness. She did not expect to have the opportunity to meet the man in front of her again after parting in New Mexico. I followed that guy. Kale raised his chin forward and said to Thor, who was about to kiss Jane passionately in the rain. Thor, you can reminisce about the old days and be passionate about the old days, but can you stop the rain first? We are all watching. Hearing Kale's words, Thor could only shrug helplessly and stop the intimacy with Jane. He raised the Thor hammer in his left hand and stopped the heavy rain that was indirectly caused by him. After the rain stopped. Daisy. The young assistant quickly stepped forward with concern. His eyes fell on Daisy's hand that was intimately hugging Kale. His face could not help but stiffen a little, and he asked in a hurry, "Who is he?" "I remember you said that you don't have a boyfriend." Perhaps because he was too anxious, he did not recognize Kale at first. "Your admirer?" Kyle smiled and lowered his head to look at Daisy. Daisy rolled her eyes at him and hugged him even tighter. Her towering breasts were pressed against her arms and were almost deformed, causing the young assistant to stare in a daze. Daisy's cheeks were pink. Her sexy lips approached Kale and she whispered, "Please, help me. I can't help you with this. Deal with it yourself." Kale shook his head and pushed gently with his palm. Without much strength, Daisy's body was slowly pushed away by a soft repulsive force. Daisy looked at Kale who walked away from her. Her cheeks puffed up and she stomped her feet angrily. She fiercely bared her fangs and brandished her claws at his back. "Damn it! You're still the same." The young assistant widened his eyes and looked at her in disbelief. "Daisy, it's really you," Daisy snorted and put her hands on her waist. "Yes, I like him. What's wrong?" The young assistant did not dare to make a sound. A group of policemen wanted to come forward and negotiate with Jane and others, but the police captain obviously recognized Kale and hurriedly waved to issue an emergency retreat signal. Many policemen were confused, but they obediently got into the police car and left. Kale walked step by step towards Thor and Jane. The closer he got, the tighter his frown became. Kale's pressure overflowed involuntarily. Feeling the terrible pressure like a mountain, Jane subconsciously leaned on Thor's strong arm. "Kale, you scared her." Thor looked at Jane and then looked at Kale, who was approaching, and reminded him. Kale looked straight at Jane next to Thor and said, "Thor, there's something wrong with her." "What? What's wrong with her?" Thor was blinking in surprise. Then, with Jane's body as the center, a strange and powerful red energy suddenly erupted and exploded in the air. Thor, who was closest to it, was directly blown away. Kale reacted quickly and raised his left hand. 20 times the repulsive force immediately formed a protective shield, offsetting and isolating the impact of the red energy, just enough to protect Daisy and others behind him. After the strange energy burst out of her body, Jane suddenly lost consciousness and fainted directly on the wet ground. That was ether particles? Kale narrowed his eyes, his cold and calm gaze never moved away from Jane's delicate body. Found it, the fifth Infinity Stone. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.